And good evening, everyone. How are we all? Let me sing among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. Smoke's killing me. I can't do it. Can't do it, guys. Sorry. Next time. I cannot find the actual full documentary on YouTube. Can somebody link it to me? I'd like to go over it. Depending on how long it is. If it's like... If this thing's like an hour long. I think it's only 30 minutes. You'll find a link? Cool. Do that. Unfortunately, you can't post a link here, so you'll have to figure out some way to get it to me. Stream notes? Yeah, put it in stream notes. That'd be good. Otherwise, we'll jump into the Lonerbox review. I see we have some upset fanboys in the audience tonight. So I'm not seeing a link in stream notes. I'm assuming we couldn't find it. Yeah, we're running with that. Alright, we're going to look at Lonerbox's coverage of it. Because apparently there's some content here that's specific to Lonerbox, so... That in itself should be interesting. I don't hold Matt Walsh in any regard, so I'm not feeling the loss. Yeah, still no update in stream notes. Yeah, alright. We'll do that then.
Hey, so I am
Egon.
not a woman,
Hi.
but I'm told they exist, so we should talk about them.
Women don't
And before we
exist. They can't
even
hurt you.
think about talking about them, we have to define what they are. Obviously. So, what is the definition of a woman? Personally, I don't give a I know what a woman is. A woman is what your dad said he felt like when I was railing him last night. But we're at a point now where we have to define what a woman is. And that's because of a guy called Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh, seen here looking like a reanimated 1970s geography teacher, is a conservative pundit known for his controversial mind, who made a feature-length documentary about his journey to discover the truth, wherein he asks some zany progressive types to answer the question, what is a woman? One of the big exposés of this documentary is that quite a lot of progressive people, even professors of gender studies, can't give a good definition of a woman.
What exactly is a woman?
Well, for me, it's actually a really simple answer, and that's a person who identifies as a woman.
But what are they identifying as?
As a woman.
But what is that?
As a woman.
Do you know what a circular definition is?
So here's, I mean, the problem is obvious here. This person is going to be critical of the concept and its essentiality in the first place. When he's talking about what is a woman, he's going to be referring to a category that is culturally specific. So it doesn't have any essential properties outside of a specific cultural context. And in present day, when all these things are being interrogated, you wouldn't have a fixed definition that you would just naively refer to when asked what is a woman, if you're informed on the subject. So it's not a circular definition. It's just he's not doing what Matt Walsh is doing with the word.
I do.
It's sort of like what you're doing right now, where a woman is a woman.
Now, you know what, Matt? On this point, I agree. Anyone who identifies as a woman is not a good definition. A circular definition is not a definition at all. The whole point of a definition is to give you a better understanding of a word, and this just doesn't do that. In fact, this statement is just as useless as a definition as this one. But coming
Well, no, it's not, because there's other things that are laden behind this. The reason why we would fix on a woman as anyone who identifies as a woman is more complicated than just convenience. There are political and cultural realities that are attached to the identification to one's identification as a woman that exist entirely apart from the coherency of the concept as a whole, or whether or not it is something essential to the human experience. Does that make sense? So, like, for example, someone could identify as a Muslim, right? Well, what's a Muslim? I mean, technically the word refers to somebody who has a relationship with some being that not everybody agrees exists. A good number of analysts and scholars about Islam or about Muslims don't believe that being exists. And so from that vantage point, you shouldn't actually be able to say that in a substantive sense, in the substantive sense that a Muslim might mean, that a Muslim as a category even makes any sense. Because it's like it's a one who submits to Allah. But I don't believe Allah exists, so I don't believe one submits to Allah. Alright. Well, now we're in a bit of a pickle. Unless what we're dealing with here is strictly a sociological element, where we have people who, in a certain type of political community, specifically democratic one, identify as this thing, and as a consequence of, like, certain types of identity that we dignify as a condition of people being full members of a democratic society as equals, you accept those uncritically for what they are, in that public-facing sense. So a Muslim in that case is someone who identifies as a Muslim. If they say they're a Muslim, they're a Muslim. That doesn't mean that in like a deep sociological sense we attach like ideas or activities or beliefs to that person. But people who identify as a Muslim occupy a substantive place in society. And they occupy a substantive place in society with respect to each other and with respect to other groups. Does that make sense? So.
just as useless as a definition as this one.
So same with the woman definition. You can be like a gender abolitionist, by which could be meant you believe that man and woman as sort of fixed categories of person in society are culturally contingent, possibly harmful, definitely unnecessary. However, in your present, in the society in which you live right now, there are people who identify with these things, and that identification has consequences, given the fact that they're interfacing with a society that is not gender abolitionist. And so when you refer to a woman, because like the society isn't blind to these categories, even if the categories don't have a substantive, don't have like ontological substance to them or something. Like, for example, like a society can be racist even if the category race is unscientific. Why? Because it classifies people according to race, and it disadvantages or advantages them by that metric. And so it itself is racist in that it's oriented around the concept and treats people as if that concept matters, even if the category itself doesn't bear, much substantive content worthy of consideration by somebody who actually, cares about the truth of the matter. Well, same with this. You may believe that the notion of woman is, in some sense, spurious or unnecessary, and yet society doesn't. Society attaches practically like tremendous weight to these identifications. And so even if you disagree with the categorization, these are made to matter by the social situation. And so you still need to refer to women. And so one way you ameliorate this is who is a woman? Well, I don't want to allow this category to, oppress other members of society because of the sprays category. I don't want people to be brute forced into positions that are harmful or painful for them. So the inclusive attitude is a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. Because that's an attitude that permits, for example, people who don't identify with the gender norms associated with quote-unquote woman or quote-unquote man to be included in a category that doesn't hurt them, or to not be forced into a category that does hurt them, while simultaneously not committing you to an essentialist attitude towards either of those categories. Does that make sense? That's immediately what I think when I see Matt Walsh criticizing this person for making a circular argument. He's not. It's just Matt Walsh is not operating at a very sophisticated level.
But coming back for a second, why is Matt Walsh doing this? Is the center of this man's political message really the fact that some people struggle to define the word woman? Or is this more like his Mott and Bailey, where you get your foot in the door with a fairly defensible statement and then follow up with your real beliefs, which are maybe a bit less savory? Maybe that's why he made a documentary about how some progressive people might look silly when they try to define what a woman is, and not what he really believes, which is gender transition should be illegal for anyone of any age. But let's not make this about Matt Walsh. I don't care what's going on behind the dead eyes of this freedom-hating fuck. If you agree with this, then there's probably nothing I can say that's going to change.
Let's put another way, it should be illegal for doctors to do someone of any age. Oh, okay.
Your mind, and I would also just recommend you have a look at Saudi Arabia or some bullshit. However, if you are here because you just want to hear a good progressive answer to the question, what is a woman, then maybe I can help. And I'm sure you're wondering, isn't this video a bit long for such a simple question? A woman is an adult female person. Done. Get f***ed, etc. And then you might think this definition stands at odds with the progressive line which says trans woman or woman. Or maybe you just agree with this dictionary definition, but not this one. Who knows? What I'm going to do, hopefully, is show you how both of these statements can be correct at the same time.
This definition doesn't seem to work. A transgender woman is a woman who is identified as male at birth. I don't know why they're loading the identified as male at birth part. Like that's obviously going to, like, somebody who grows up who identified as male at birth and later on identifies as female or as a woman, like that person's likely going to fall under the category of transgender, but I don't see why this is a condition.
And if that sounds interesting, you should stick around. Hey, don't mind me while I thank today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Are you telling me you don't already have Atlas VPN?
Hey, you know what this means?
Why not?
If he's doing an ad break, I'm doing an ad break. Haha! Thank you, Egon.
What's wrong with you? Do you not even know? A VPN moves your internet activity through an encrypted tunnel, which means you can mask your identity online.
Skull.
What does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things. It means you're protected from spying. It means you can access geo-locked content on
Spies are
platforms
cool.
like Netflix, Amazon, them do that to you. And there's a third one, Atlas VPN. Part 1. Definitions. The narrative presented here by Matt Walsh is quite simple. Woman is a simple, age-old concept, but these dastardly progressives are out here twisting themselves up into pretzels, trying to find a definition that doesn't exclude their trans allies, and That's funny.
I could go for
Classic
pretzels.
conservative W. When Matt Walsh asks what is a woman and people can't give him a succinct answer, it gives the impression that conservatives are confused about what should be a really simple term. But I would argue it isn't so much these people who are confused about women, it's Matt Walsh who is confused about language. Look at this picture. That is your humble narrator, Toddlerbox, at the age of 3. By then, I already knew that this picture was taken with a camera. I was able to tell what a camera was.
Hey, Egon, what is a box? That doesn't look like a box to me. I don't care if you identify as one. You are not a box.
And I was mostly able to tell cameras apart from things that were not cameras. But how? Did I know the definition of a camera? Do you know the definition of a camera? When you identify a camera, are you consciously checking whether or not it's in fact a device that consists of a light-proof chamber with an aperture fitted with a lens and a shutter through which the image of an object is projected onto a surface for recording, as in a photosensitive film or an electronic sensor, or for translation into electrical impulses as for television broadcast? No. If you were to think about all the words you know, how many of them did you really learn by consulting a dictionary? Probably not many. If a child asked you, what is blue, would you really say, a color whose hue is that of a clear sky or that of the portion of the color spectrum?
Okay, chat, what would you say, what do you identify when you identify a camera in the world? See, for me, it would be a device that sees and maybe records. But specifically an artificial device that sees or records. Because camera can mean like a number of different things. It can mean a security camera, which is like, you know, it looks at you and it records, or somebody's actually like looking in real time at you through the thing. It can refer to an object that takes a static picture. It can even refer to like a cardboard box, you know, that little like school project they do where you put like the photo paper or whatever it's called on the inside and you have like a little slit. I think that's how that works.
Spectrum lying between green and violet? Or would you not just point at something blue? What you definitely could not do is come up with a definition that includes all things blue and excludes all things that are not blue. No universal definition will tell you where blue ends on this spectrum and something that is not blue begins. The point is, definitions do not always provide us with strict rules or boundaries. They very rarely do. When you try to act as if they do, you can end up looking like a bit of a walloper. And no one can demonstrate this issue better than the former television writer Graham Linehan. In one of his many Twitter exchanges with trans rights advocates, Graham was asked to define chair in a way that includes all things which are chairs and excludes all things which are not. To which he responded, "Heh, a separate seat for one person, typically with a back and 4 legs. Happy to help, but try Google next time. The definition of woman is there too."
Why a separate seat for one person? That's not true. Like a couch is a kind of chair, no?
Now, I'll give you a second to answer this question. Does that definition include all the chairs and exclude all the non-chairs? Well... And there is the pinnacle of anti-trans logic. Graham Linehan sitting on a horse's face and calling it a chair. This definition absolutely does not exclude everything that isn't a chair, not even
Oh, I see. So the point is, yeah, got it.
close. But all the same, we still know a horse is not a chair. But how? Is there anything in this definition that helps us understand how this is more of a chair than this? The mistake I think Graham has made here is that he's fallen for what Wittgenstein would have called the philosopher's craving for generality. Oh yes, this is happening. You asked me what a woman is, and now we're talking about Wittgenstein.
You only read the Blue Book in particular because of Ex Machina, and you fucking know it, Egon.
In Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein rejected the idea that definitions have to be based on a set of necessary conditions. Instead,
Wait, hang on. Is the Philosophical Investigations... I know that it's called the Notebooks, but is that the Blue Book? I thought the Blue Book was something different. Like it was a... Like they had overlap, but I thought it was a separate volume. Am I crazy?
We understand words based on what he called a family resemblance, where words are understood as a complex network of similarities overlapping and crisscrossing. The example he gives is the idea of a game. We all know what a game is, but I'm guessing most of you did not get that understanding from this absolute weapon of a definition from Merriam-Webster. Game is actually really hard to define, but all the same, it's still something most of us understand from a very young age, and the way we learn that is through examples and family resemblance. If you'll excuse the slightly lengthy quote, consider, for example, the proceedings that we call games. I mean board games, card games, ball games, Olympic games, and so on. What is common to them all? Don't say there must be something common or they would not be called games, but look and see whether there is anything common to all. For if you look at them, you will not see something that is common to all, but similarities, relationships, and a whole series of them at that. To repeat, don't think, but look. Look, for example, at board games with their multifarious relationships. Now pass to card games. Here you find many correspondences with the first group, but many common features drop out and others appear. When we pass next to ball games, much that is common is retained, but much is lost. Are they all amusing? Compare chess with noughts and crosses. Or is there always winning and losing, or competition between players? Think of patience. In ball games there is winning and losing, but when a child throws his ball at the wall and catches it again, this feature has disappeared. Look at the parts played by skill and luck, and at the difference between skill in chess and skill in tennis. Think now of games like Ring-a-Ring-a-Rosies. Here is the element of amusement, but how many other characteristic features have disappeared? And we can go through the many other groups of games in the same way. Can see how similarities crop up and disappear. And the result of this examination is, we see a complicated network of similarities overlapping and crisscrossing. Sometimes overall similarities, sometimes similarities of detail. I can think of no better expression to characterize these similarities than family resemblances, for the various resemblances between members of a family. Build, features, color of eyes, gait, temperament, etc., overlap and crisscross in the same way. And I shall say, games form a family. When it comes to...
And then he continues, this is actually, I think, a really... but if someone wished to say, there is something common to all these constructions, namely the disjunction of all their common properties, I should reply, now you are only playing with words. One might as well say, something runs through the whole thread, namely the continuous overlapping of these fibers. Yeah.
To defining a woman, we can always ask the question back. If a woman is an adult human female, then what is an adult human female? Is there some essential feature that separates adult human females from all the non-adult human females? Well, if we're going by the most rigid definition of sex, the essential feature of a female would be her capacity to make bebe. And that's simple, isn't it? In nature, the females release the eggs and the males produce the sperm. So, sorry to all you non-binary transgender fucks, but there is no middle ground here. There is no speg or spurg. I'm sorry. But unless you're willing to say that someone with a barren womb or someone who's gone through menopause is not a woman or less of a woman, then you have a problem. Because there are plenty of people in the world who we would all consider female despite them having never once released an egg. This is the same problem you run into with any other trait. Even if we assume away all the trans people, you don't need a vagina to be a woman, you don't need ovaries to be a woman, and you don't need XX chromosomes to be a woman. However, some of you might say, come on, Lonerbox, can't we just say women typically have these traits? Assigning women to someone who is missing one or two of these traits is one thing, but trans women have none of them. Which is true. Family resemblance may show how the boundaries of a word can be blurry, but it doesn't eliminate them completely. If we want to include trans people under that definition, you would still need to show how they fall under that family resemblance. To do that, some people might start with Part 2, Ultimate Postmodern Gigasoy. I don't actually hold this position, but it is very popular, so we should bring it up. So the argument here is that we only ever create categories insofar as they serve some kind of social need. We might say the definition of a woman is adult human female, but whether or not we include trans people in that definition is really up to us. In the same way that things don't need 4 legs and a back to be a chair, trans women don't need all the biological components of adult human female to be women. Here, they would talk about how the concept of a woman is more than just a collection of biological traits. It's also a set of social roles, appearances, and customs. And because we don't typically identify women by looking for these things, trans women who change their presentation and social signifiers, for example, their name and pronouns, are best seen pragmatically as women. By adopting the social role of women, they're moving themselves into that sphere of family resemblance, and in a way, it kind of works. This is why conservative pundits will sometimes do that thing where they instinctively use a trans person's preferred pronouns and then immediately have to correct themselves.
The transgender woman from Orange is the New Black.
I never watched that show.
I've never watched that show either, but she's on the cover of Time magazine.
Oh.
Or he's on the cover of Time magazine.
You know who Taftouch is?
Yeah, well, he.
She?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Whatever.
You literally pronouned her correctly the first time. Like, it's a she in your head.
That person looks like a girl.
Exactly.
It's like,
and that's enough for you.
I'll give you this. Like, my audience gives me so much shit when I say, like, Caitlyn Jenner. And it's like, well, I can't, like, I almost can't even help it. You know what I mean?
You suppose the part about the whole Catboy thing that stings him the most is that the Catboy didn't look like a boy to him? I don't know. I wonder.
Exactly, that's the point.
Now, I can't see inside these people's heads, but my guess is they do this because it isn't actually normal to categorize people in the way they say you should. Their instinct is to see the people they're referring to as women because of family resemblance, and they have to fight that instinct whenever they want to misgender someone, which is kind of funny. Coming back to Wittgenstein, the argument is that we don't need to define women by naming any single common feature or necessary conditions. Instead, what we do is appeal to normal practice. A very good example of this actually comes from a rather crude exchange on 4chan where a biological essentialist argues, if it has a penis, it isn't a she. To which Johnny Bravo, the social constructionist and Wittgenstein understander, replies, I'm straight, so whatever makes my dick hard is a woman.
Somebody sent me a better version of that. Hang on. I'll have to pause it at the right moment so I don't break TOS, but it's so beautiful.
Hey, mama, I'm straight, so whatever makes my dick hard is a woman.
There we go. Oh, I caught it just in time. I'm so good at this.
Obviously, this is just a joke. Don't use this argument in trans conversations. So, if women is socially constructed, the social utility of including trans women in that category would be fewer trans people will commit suicide, the mental health issues of trans people are dramatically alleviated, and straight men will no longer have to spend their evenings nervously Googling whether or not their boner for Blair White makes them gay. Everyone wins. But then a more old school or modernist type would say, no, we don't just invent categories for social utility. We use categories to refer to things that are facts of the universe, even if those facts make us unhappy. And if you stick your head underwater for long enough, no amount of social construction is ever going to save you from the concept of drowning.
Facts of the universe that we... Oh, that is such a beautiful still. Oh, I love that. I'm going to come back and screen cap this later. Facts of the universe that we know are facts of the universe because they were handed down to us by people who didn't understand the existence of bacteria.
2 plus 2 does not equal 4 because it makes us happy. We might argue about the symbols or the words, but at the end of the day, 2 plus 2 will always be 4. Always has been, and always will be after we're gone. I think there's a problem here where people will confuse the idea of a social...
Doesn't Lawrence Krauss have that t-shirt that's like 2 plus 2 is sometimes 5? I guess it could be 2 times, but it was 2 plus 2 is sometimes 5. I forget the reason for that, but that was like a thing.
Construct with a social invention. For example, when people write essays where they describe something like the body as a social construct, they're not saying bodies are made up. The body is real. The social construct only refers to the way we understand it. If we go down the line of treating gender purely as a social invention that only exists because we agree it does, I would argue that that can take you into some kind of difficult places.
Well, here's like something else too. So I think I understood this the other day, and Brooks can eat me alive if I'm butchering this. But the notion in Deleuze about the body without organs. The point isn't that there are bodies without like distinguishable parts, right? The point though is that they're referring to bodies that you have not imposed a designating schematic over, so that you can point to, this is the pancreas, this is the stomach, because there's going to be continuity between all these different parts. Again, I've talked about this before, no word of a lie. A guy called Christopher Columbus discovered that the clitoris was a separate organ. So you can say it's a factual statement of history that Christopher Columbus discovered the clitoris. And what does that mean? Does that mean that he was the first person to discover that there was like a pleasure-producing part of the body there? No, he's the first person to identify it medically as like its own discrete thing. Which, in absolute terms, it's not. It's continuous with surrounding body parts, right? Non-productive entities? Oh, well, fuck off, Brooks. My definition is still cool, and it still works. It just doesn't work with Deleuze. I haven't read it yet! It's not my fault. Plus, the guy writes like the Riddler or something. It's ridiculous.
For example, if everyone in society decides...
Non-productive entities are the body without organs? Brooks, get on here. I want you to correct me on this. I'm mad. Get on here. Call in. I swear to God. Not asking you. I was supposed to not have any more of this, and now you're making me have more. Oh, unbelievable. Need to hide this from myself. Well, I don't care if you're pissing. Hurry up. Be the body without organs. Be non-productive. Yeah, just a heads up. I publicly humiliate my patrons. That's how we roll.
Oh my God.
I'm so sorry. Okay. Learn us,
Okay.
Brooks.
How are you doing?
I'm doing swell. How are you?
Okay. Let me get you out of my ear. I had to run to my computer because I was in the room with my 5-month-old infant who's asleep.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you want to...
It's okay.
No, you
it's
can go
too
back.
late. I'm already here, you motherfucker. And
I
here's
feel
the
bad
thing.
now.
So,
Okay, go on.
you should feel bad. You should feel terrible.
I do.
Not only for that, but also for the way you described something completely wrong. So let's talk about how we derive meaning. We derive meaning emergently from experience. We experience things and we build things out of a descriptive need to describe things that we experience. It's an arrangement of things. If I see someone and I describe them, oh, we'll call them a woman. It's an emergent element out of how I'm descriptively talking about the world around me. When we talk about the body without organs, we can talk about a full body. A full body is a completely productive process. Your body is heart, lungs, liver, blood vessels, muscles, skin, brain, nervous system, millions of things. Tons of organs that are all producing and connecting and doing shit. But if I were to nuke your body, like just vaporize it, there's still somehow something of you left behind in people's minds. The essence of President Sunday. You are the structure that is produced from the collective of organs that has made you. The same way this works with language. When we have descriptive words, and we've had them for about, a few thousand years, words can describe, and they can be phonetic, consonant, they can be pure noises, we can use pictographs, there's a million ways to have words exist. But we're in a really interesting place, especially through how semiotics plays and images play through capital, which I won't get into, but when we have a body without organs, which is sort of the nature of over time, you start seeing the pattern of the thing. Oh, this collection, and it's why it's actually super relevant to this discussion, this collection of things that I have experienced all my life and called a woman, I was told this is the word for it, and this is what I see as it, instead of it being descriptive, it becomes prescriptive. The body without organs that is not productive, it is a non-productive entity, somehow produces desire and it produces connections to it. People are attached to the word, even though it's no longer emergent or connected to anybody. The body without organs is this essence. It is the non-productive entity that somehow falls back on all the productive entities that emergently produce it in the first place.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. So here's where I was confused. I think I was confusing his description of sort of the recording surface with the body.
That's where the BWO is. Yes.
Yeah. So, but one of the so as like.
No. Again, the BWO is emergent. Over time, you have an experience and you have sensations. A baby doesn't see, oh, this is.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Breast.
Fuck. Okay. Yeah. Oh God. I really misread that.
The baby records a billion sensations as it does everything, and over time, it sees. When I say the word "mommy" to my 4-year-old, the baby doesn't like go, oh, this is mother, excellent, or like even see her as the edges of her. Like babies go through an entire thing where they don't even understand that mommy and daddy are different, or that mommy is a different person from themselves. Like the edges of things we create. Okay. And that is the body. My body is the edge of myself. It's two bodies have sex. This is how we define this thing. The child, as the child grows, the series of experiences it has records over and over itself. It's like the reason they use the word recording is think of it as a magnetic tape recorder. Doesn't work in the digital age, but for old people or people who have a tape recorder, like you could record over it once, but the more and more you do it, it hardens those sounds and you kind of can't stop those things from being a thing. Suddenly, these patterns that have repeated over and over and given you generally the same sensations or spot on the same sensations if they're very hard with deep intensity and fucking all shit you've run into, suddenly those sensations, instead of emergently causing you to go, oh, this is mommy. Oh, okay. Now it's mommy is this. That flip is the switch. This is the moment when you move from a full body to a body without organs. Now, there's power here, and I won't necessarily get into this. This is not necessarily a bad thing. This is just the nature of human experience. We experience patterns over time. As we experience more and more of them, we start becoming predictive. As we become more and more predictive, we harden in our predictions, and instead of assuming they're predictive, they become almost demands. And this is essentially what Matt Walsh has done throughout this whole thing. You can no more define cool or silly or really anything because of the nature of the differences between, signification, manifestation, and denotation inside of any singular problematic. But hey, we can leave that aside. His life has been, this is a woman. I've seen this over and over. I have these specific sensations around this. If you go back to the 80s and 90s, Matt Walsh is my age. Jerry Springer, Sally Jesse Raphael, all these shitty talk shows had the reveal of, hey, which of these is really a woman and which of these is a man.
Yeah.
Like he lived in a space where woman was this sort of hyper feminine sex object. And so now, if you're going to call someone a woman, it needs to be a hyper feminine sex object to him, because the body without organs, the non-productive entity, the arrangement he's expecting that comes from you saying woman, he is not being serviced by. And he is literally like wanting to fuck the idea of a woman. And that's the problem for him.
Yeah. That's a really elegant way to put that. How the hell did you just do that? Just on the fly like that? That well. Like, goddamn.
This is literally my life philosophy. And I kind of talk about Deleuze, about 6 to 10 hours a week randomly. Like I find this to be the most interesting. We just finished Logic of Sense, which I mentioned in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll have the recordings up soon enough. But Logic of Sense is literally about what Wittgenstein tries to go through here. And I think Deleuze does better through the eyes of Louis Hjelmslev, who wrote Resume of a Theory of Language, as well as, just general semiotics. But he does it through the eyes of Lewis Carroll and a handful of other authors. And it's beautiful.
Okay, but Look, you may have dismantled me thoroughly in front of my entire audience. However, you still pronounced Wittgenstein as Wittgenstein, so we'll call.
I don't because you know how little he deserves any care. Not mostly. I said that to make you angry, and it worked. I mean, it fucking worked.
Go back to bed, Brooks. Thank you very much.
I'm glad I can help.
You were actually very helpful. Thank you.
All right, good. I'll enjoy the rest of your stream.
I will. You can stick around if you want, but
I may hang for a minute.
All right.
I probably might bounce too.
Let me share this. Don't feel like you need to stick around though. I feel bad for pulling you away from your kid.
She's sleeping and she's teething, so no one cares.
Fair enough. Okay, good to know. All right, let me know if you can. Oh, God damn it, my mouse is gone again. Okay, we're good. We're back.
Decided tomorrow that trans people don't exist, would they just stop existing? If your answer to that is no, then you are accepting that there is something internally real about trans people. Whatever that something is, it wasn't socially constructed into existence, nor can it be socially constructed away. And whatever it is that makes people trans, it's no less real than oxygen, water, or your mum. And if you reject that notion, you do run the risk of running into what I would call part 3, the turf trap. So some people who are pro-trans will argue that sex and gender are completely separate. Sex refers to observable biological truths, and gender is all of the social rules and expectations that are placed on males and females.
Thank you for the 2 months,
In that
Joshua.
case, a woman's sex would be XX chromosomes, ovaries, vaginas, and their gender would be good luck filling that one in without stereotyping women. And the problem with this, aside from the one I've just mentioned, is that this is basically a TERF argument. I've noticed recently that TERFs will use this very sneaky tactic where they try to adopt the language of gender abolitionists. They'll say, all gender roles are oppressive. They're costumes that are forced upon us through thousands of years of objectification, patriarchy, capitalism, and all that. But bubbling just below the surface of that progressive-sounding rhetoric is the message, you are the sex you were born as, bitch, and no amount of makeup and dresses and pronouns will ever change that. The other problem with the sex and gender are completely separate line is that it does suggest being trans is nothing more than a social phenomenon. If sex is strictly biological and gender is strictly social, then transgender identities would have no factual basis to them.
So here's an interesting question. Is that to your mind, this is actually something I haven't fully determined for myself. Is that a problem?
Is what a problem?
Is the notion that being trans is purely a social phenomenon? Does that actually present a problem?
No.
See, to me it does. Yeah. To me it doesn't.
No.
So I'm a little bit...
Again, everything. It's one of those things. I used to get in arguments with some of my friends who were like really into like the gay marriage, queer movement of trying to get gay marriage in like the early 2000s, and we'd friendly fights, but we'd get in an argument because they went straight to the biological reductionist argument, which worked, granted, and really worked on a lot of people. But I always personally found it like this really weird, like, so basically you're buying into the structure and idea that you don't get to make the choice of who you love. And I would say the same thing here, that if it is more than a social construct, that there's something more to it beyond the meaning that we give it, I worry greatly that this logic then gets pushed back into the, hey, well, you know, it's the way they are. They can't help it. Ouch. We just have to allow them to be the way they are. As long as they're close enough to the norm, we can handle it. Ouch. But also those people who don't want to be normal.
Yeah.
And, you know, aren't born that way, you know, communists, because you're not born a communist. I've had people say that shit to me. Like, that's, everything's a social construct. And it's the kind of thing that just needs to be taken on head on, because otherwise you end up in really, really dangerous territory fast. I'm excited to see, Lonerbox does great vids, so I'm excited to see where he goes with it.
Well, here's the thing. I'm anticipating, because I've heard things down the grapevine, that there are some problems with this video, but I want to give credit to Lonerbox here. I want to give credit to Lonerbox here, though. When Lonerbox makes mistakes, they're going to be interesting mistakes, which is a big compliment, actually. Like I think he's actually working through stuff, and I don't necessarily think I know better. So I'm interested in this.
And if your gender identity is nothing more than a social invention, that would suggest that transness is something that could be socialized into someone, or worse, socialized out of them.
Now, the worry here, of course, would be that if you can be socialized into, I suppose, being trans as a distinct subgender by itself, or something along those lines, if I'm not completely out to lunch, the worry here is that this plays into these sort of reactionary conservative argument that this is some kind of social fad by dint of it being specifically tied to some kind of social influence. Of course, like, ignoring the fact that, well, actually, like, the gender binary that this challenges or represents some kind of complication to is itself also that. So.
And based on our current understanding of trans people, that definitely doesn't seem to be the case. That's why conversion therapy doesn't work. Not on trans people and not on cis people. The question it might help to be able to answer is, why are some people trans?
Here's
oh God.
Can I hear?
This is not going to be good.
No, it's not. I'm gonna take a dangerous stab at this one though, and it's really dangerous. So thank God I've got too much whiskey in my system. I wonder about that, given the conditions of what we think success means. So does conversion therapy work? Well, do we mean that can somebody be brutalized into like changing their self-perception so that they avow a different self-perception than they would have if they weren't brutalized? And I think the question that would come to my mind then is this authentic in like a deep way?
You ever listen to Blue Collar Comedy Tour?
I don't.
I know it. You probably don't. You might be a little young. It's featured specifically. I can't remember who did a wonderful. I think was it someone did a great sort of break apart of like the comedy. Cody Shoddy, Somewhere News, did a break part about like conservative comedy. And he went back to and he showed specifically one of my favorite Ron White bits, which I think came to mind here, and I think it's apropos. It's not about trans necessarily, but I'll connect it in a second. Yeah. Because now like conservatives and blue collar is all associated with like right wing. Ron White was not necessarily that, and he told a friend of his, he said everyone's a little gay, and his friend said no, absolutely not. I'm the straightest man who ever lived. He's like, well, you like porn? Absolutely, I love porn. I love watching all kinds. Well, what do you like? Well, girl and girl, but my favorite, man and woman. Do you like the guy in the porn to have a tiny little penis? No, I like a big throbbing hard. That's the joke. Like everyone, this idea to connect that back. Yeah. Everyone's trans. Like there's this silliness that we have. We're getting dropped in one of two buckets. You're a man or a woman, and the reality is, a lot of us dance between it. Some people are harder in some spaces. Some people are harder on one side, sure. But everyone is like at some level. I mean, I paint my nails. I care a great deal about like doing my hair right. I've worn dresses. This shit doesn't bother me. I kind of like it.
I mean, so did King Louis XIV, to be clear.
Yeah, like these like, so what is feminine? What is woman? Like the setup we have socially. If we talk about gender like this, it's everyone's kind of wherever they want to be, and let people be whatever they are. The reason we have people generally who are trans or land in one of those two things is because as a society, we're deeply so abusive that we force people to choose one or the other. And we assume that everything has to be a network in a singular direction. If my son, for example, wears a pink tutu out, sometimes he does, people immediately begin assuming he wants to do princess stuff and this other thing and woman thing and girl thing and girl thing and girl thing. Because they have no ability to just let people connect with whatever the fuck they're going to connect with and be whatever they are. Yeah. So yes, we end up with like a weird repressive society that pushes people into a binary that ultimately services capitalism. It's the same thing as black and white people. There's no such thing. It's a complete social construct.
Actually, case in point, and I'm glad that you touched on this. What's sort of coming to the fore here, and I think this is really the error that Lonerbox is going to make and is making here. The word trans is a substitution historically for a different term, which is a term that's originally meant to describe a pathology, which is an invert, right? And so the assumption that seems to be feeding into, like, for example, even in his explanation of like, well, then conversion therapy would work. I mean, first of all, like this is the whole 1984 thing. Like, conversion therapy of various types does work. And maybe it actually does work, maybe like something akin to what is aspired to by conversion therapy, which is incompetent. Maybe something that aspires to what conversion therapy aspires to do, but is incompetent, but which conversion therapy is incompetent to do, takes place like just through normal socialization. Like we parody homophobes all the time, and sometimes this turns out to be true, as being people who are disturbed by the fact that they live in a society that pathologizes homosexuality, yet themselves like experience like a great degree of tension with that because they do themselves have homosexual tendencies. And I think what's sort of fitting into this is the idea that this needs to be incorrigible in order to be real, but he's still thinking of it in terms of an illness with the binary as the default. Am I making sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're starting from any level of biological realism for this, I find it difficult. Again, even if you were to just go down the road, and it's, I always love to bring up anytime Ayn Rand made a good point, I always try to keep it. And because there's like 3 of them. She had a line that I think is just spot on here. It's no amount of smart people in your race mean that you are a smart person, just like no amount of stupid people in your race make you a stupid person.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple line, but it's because we do this silly thing of essentialization. No trans person is the same as any straight, as the same as anything else. We categorize, we create this non-productive arrangement that we presume has meaning. And just to sort of go back to real quick, because I have to quote Anti-Oedipus after that long thing, everywhere there is a microscopic transsexuality, resulting in the woman containing as many men as the man, and the man as many women, all capable of entering, men with women, women with men, into relations of production of desire that overturn the statistical order of the sexes. Making love is not becoming 1, it's not becoming 2, but becoming 100,000. Desiring machines, the base level in Deleuze's ontology, or the non-human sex. It's not 1 or 2 sexes, but in sexes. The schizoanalytic slogan of Desiring Revolution is, first of all, to each its own sexes. It's one of my favorite lines of the book, and it's the end of one of the final chapters of it. And it's a thing I very, very, very fall in love with.
I'll have to actually go through this soon. I went through the first 3 chapters, and then I got distracted by the boring fucking Destiny stuff. Can't wait for that to end.
Someday.
Soon. We're gonna make a splash, then we're gonna duck the hell out.
Clearly, it's something in their psychology, and this is where I think progressives should be a lot more willing to challenge anti-trans types on their own ground. Because according to an increasing number of biologists, the answer to where being trans comes from might just be in the brain. I emphasize
Oh,
the word
no.
brain
With that-
because the
And with that, I'm going to say goodnight.
Have a
It's
good
been
night.
lovely. I already know where it's going, and I'm fine.
Yeah, me too.
There is no biological reality to any of this. You might as well do the same thing with black and white people. I'm just saying, there's no difference.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. Thank you, Brooks.
You
Have a good
guys
night.
enjoy.
Take care. Oh, Egon. Naughty boy.
brain is the most complex organism in the known universe, and our knowledge is very limited. But there is a growing consensus among biologists that we do have something called brain sex. Now, I can confirm that brain sex is real.
Crucially, hang on.
Do have something called brain sex.
What is this? Some facts are very clear. Genes play a critical role in determining brain sex. The genetic impact is irreversible. It cannot be reversed by gonadal hormones, although hormones also play a crucial role in neurobehavioral development. Who is this? Marianne J. Legato, MD. Again, she's gonna be an evolutionary psychologist. I just know it. Let me see here. Marianne J. Legato. Let's see. Marianne J. Legato, MD, is an American internationally known academic, physician, author, and lecturer, and globally recognized expert in gender-specific medicine, the science of how normal humans function, and how the experience of the same disease vary as a function of gender/biological sex. That the slashes here is instructive. Okay. Yeah, this notion of brain sex is a mistake, but there's no detail on the Wikipedia page.
Sex. Now, I can confirm that brain sex is real, but I don't want to go into that here because I don't want to embarrass your mum. Now, the evidence for trans and cis people having different brains is not simple. Without getting too bogged down, I'll just give you a rapid fire. Trans and cis women have similar levels of activity in the right superior frontal gyrus, the part that helps people distinguish voices.
I see what he's doing. Okay, so right, so the problem is that he's conflating the fact that dysphoria has some kind of connection to like a brain state, I suppose. I'm gonna butcher this isn't my area at all. But he's conflating that with the identification of people who are trans. But there are trans people, for example, who don't suffer from dysphoria. In fact, I suppose it must be the case that all trans people at some point in their lives, even prior to transition, don't experience dysphoria, because at some point they sleep. And then, like, there can be lulls. Like, sometimes people don't experience dysphoria except when their periods happen, or except when they're misgendered. Like, it's a lot more complicated than that. Sometimes people experience dysphoria in response to, like, non-biological factors. They get invited to, like, a women's shower or something. So yeah, so like this idea that dysphoria is a condition of being trans, like it falls apart for the same reason that biological processes of any kind are a condition of being a woman. It's just, I mean, like, I mean, for God's sake, like even think of like a condition of being human. What's more human, like a zombie with quote unquote human DNA, or Data from Star Trek The Next Generation? Well, Data, clearly. He's an artificial human, but he's more of a human than like a necromorph from Dead Space. And yet the necromorph from Dead Space would technically have more biological similarities to us than Data would. Right?
Trans men and women seem to have their own levels of mean diffusivity that diverge from cis people. Their levels of connection between neural networks are different from those of cis people. And trans and cis women have similar sized central subdivisions of the bed of the nucleus of the stria terminalis.
Except here's the problem. You're using this, presumably, to identify transgender... Like how are you identifying who are transgender women? In order to say that transgender women have these features. Like, who are you excluding from this? The post-mortem brains. Oh my god. Right, of course. So in the mid-1990s, his group examined the post-mortem brains of 6 transgender women and reported that the size of the central subdivision of the bed nucleus. I'm really interested into how they're identifying them then. Are these just like, do they mean drag queens? Like, what do they mean? In the 1990s, you could not be openly trans easily at all. I didn't even hear about the notion of transness until the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, men dressed as women was still the butt of many a joke on children's television. Like, this is... I don't understand how you would... Huh. The guy's name is Dick Swab. That's hilarious.
Who am I kidding? Apparently that's the part of the brain that has a lot to do with sexual behavior. The point is, there's something...
Like here's... Like, again, going back to this, like, just immediate problem with the study. These women were dead. Or these people were dead. Because, like, more to the point, if they're dead, then I suppose they're not avowing that they're women. They're being identified as women by a third party. Are they identifying trans women as just people with penises who cross-dress? Like, it becomes... Like, you have to break this down further.
Lot to do with sexual behavior. The point is, there's something...
Present Sunday, being trans in the 90s was uncommon but not impossible. I'm not so worried about it being impossible socially, like there wasn't like any categorization. Like the category didn't exist. My issue though is I wouldn't have a lot of faith in people to, you know, like identify it with the level of nuance that we'd like them to, you know? Present Sunday, the video I sent on how gender dysphoria is treated talks about this kind of stuff for the first 30 minutes. I highly recommend you cover it before you go too far into this. Do we want to take a break and look at that? That might be very interesting, actually. Have you sent it to me just now? Send it to me again, okay? Pretty sure that these were self-identified trans people who donated their body to science. Okay, well, if that's the case. Just like we didn't recognize being trans or being we didn't recognize transness, I suppose, on censuses until recently. So, like, I don't know how you would... Like, it gets kind of tricky, you know? Like, these are people who identify as trans who donate their bodies to science. To whom did they identify as trans, like, on paper? Because when you're dead, like... Oh, he talks about this in the first 30 minutes? Okay, well, let's take a quick divergence. And let's look at this.
Chief at our program.
Education time. Healthcare of the transgender patient and the Powers method
I am Dr.
of
William
hormonal
Powers.
transitioning.
I am the sole practitioner at the Powers Family Medicine Center, which is this huge office of 3 exam rooms in Farmington Hills. I have a very unique doctor in that I treat transgender patients, and I never set out to do this. I had one patient with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and after I diagnosed him with that, they told me that their sibling, you know, basically that, you know, my sister says she's my brother now, can you help him? And I said, meh. So they came in and I met them, and, you know, I basically said, sure, I'd love to provide this care for you. And this was down in Monroe County. And there was nobody down there that would do transgender care, like no one, and they just didn't have access to it. So I said, sure, this is something that I will do. Let me talk to my attending first. And I had a super cool attending, Jessica Sharon, who basically said, if you get certified in WPATH method, you can do it. I said, okay. So me and the patient went to the classes, I learned how to do it, and then I had 1. Then I had 2, then I had 4. And then by the time I graduated from residency, I had 50. I was nominated for Resident of the Year for my clinic. It was pretty cool. But afterwards, I couldn't find a job because a lot of people didn't want to hire somebody that took care of transgender people. It just like wasn't the thing that they wanted in their clinics. And I know this because me and my wife, who's sitting right there, would apply to the same thing. And we were both chief at our program, both had excellent board scores, and she would get a call back and I wouldn't. So I realized pretty quickly that, you know, something was amiss, and a couple places were honest enough to say, yeah, we don't want those people here. So fast forward a few years later, and I now open my own clinic.
President Sunday, I dated a trans man in 1982. We had trans women friends from our activist groups. Many people are trans much longer than you may realize. Like, they categorized themselves that way, or like there was like a... Okay, that's interesting. I didn't realize that was like open. Granted, like I was in like a milieu where that wouldn't have been the case. Horrifically, almost every single person who I thought was a woman who I dated growing up ended up being trans men later on. Not horrifically because of that, but just because it's like... I swear to God, I'm not doing it on purpose. Is the point.
I have about 1,500 transgender people that I've seen over the past few years, and I have developed a new way of doing hormonal transitioning that is different from the WPATH method. It requires less drugs and it's safer, and we're going to talk about it. But first, what I want you guys to basically take from this, understanding gender dysphoria in the transgender patient, preventative medicine for transgender people, and understanding the process of basic hormonal transitioning. At the end of this lecture, you should know how to transition someone. It's not that hard. If you can handle treating diabetes, you can handle this.
Oh, no, I understand people were writing about this for like a long time. The reason why I was perplexed about that is because that hadn't really bled, as far as I was aware, into general medical parlance. This was still something that was being done sort of critically of how we were treating people, like in like how state medicine was treating people. Does that make sense? Like, I understand these categories existed. I understand people talked about them. Like, a lot of these texts are like 40, 50 years old now. Older. But, like, it took a while for it to bleed into common parlance.
Diabetes is vastly harder than this. Lectures designed to be presented to physicians, so there are people in the audience that I recognize that are not physicians. Understand it's not meant for you. But you can still be here. It's totally welcome to. But some of the language is very medical in nature, and not all of it is super PC. Also, no major medical society has any transgender guidelines. No AMA, no ACOG, no nothing. The 2 main sets of guidelines are the UCSF and the WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender.
Kate transitioned to female in the 1980s after escaping Scientology and came out as non-binary in the 1990s. Her work was a big deal. Oh, interesting. Okay, I'll have to do some more reading on that, clearly. That's what these streams are for.
Gender health. They have not changed a whole lot. UCSF is probably the better of the two. WPATH has been more or less the same for like the past 40 years. I haven't really updated it a whole lot. And then mine, which are not officially published yet, but will be, and I'm working on it. So anyways, because I have so many patients, I derive information different than a normal practice. About 75% of my patients now are transgender, which is pretty wild. So I see things that other people don't, because when you have that much and you're a doctor, and doctors are good at pattern recognition, you spot patterns and you start to see things that are interesting. Like last week, I had 4 patients with a tertiary nipple, all transgender. I don't see that often. But then all of a sudden in a row, they all were a thing. I don't know if it was just like statistical anomaly or what, but now I'm looking for third nipples on trans patients. And it makes sense from Mullerian duct abnormalities and other things would be associated with gender dysphoria, which we're going to talk about. There's been a couple people over the years that are not doctors that have helped me with this. I didn't get all this knowledge because I'm such a genius. I got a lot of it because transgender women and transgender men are experimenting on themselves in the street with the IY hormones. And some of them are biochemists. And some of them are very smart people who figured some stuff out, shared it with me, and I listened and tried it, and it worked better than what everybody else did. So I credit them here. How do they view me? So I walk into a room and I see a patient, and it's a young transgender man. He's, say, 18 to 25 years old. And I say, hey, I'm Dr. Powers. Nice to meet you. What can I do for you? Testosterone. Like, what? Testosterone. I'm here for testosterone. I'm like, well, I'm sorry. Why do you want testosterone? Like, there's just no... Like, they're there for a purpose. And you'll understand by the end of the lecture why this is and why transgender people react this way towards medical providers. But basically, they view me as a gatekeeping doctor robot. I am the guy who gives them testosterone. I am the thing they have to get past in order to get it. This is literally how they view us, and this is not what we are. I am very much not a normal professional doctor. I have a lot of really interesting hobbies. I was just talking about how I heat my house with Bitcoin mining. Big computer nerd. I used to have 2 Guinness World Record cats. One was the tallest cat to ever live, and the other one had the longest tail ever on a cat. I'm really good at manipulating the biology of living things, and I designed a diet for them that I thought would be biochemically ideal for feline species. It seems like I was right. I play a lot of Pokemon Go, and I'm into steampunk. I do cosplay. I'll be going this weekend to Detroit Comic-Con, probably dressed like that. So that's Electric Forest. Me and my wife went to Tomorrowland this year in Belgium, so we do a lot of fun stuff. So why did everybody do this? Well, it's scary. People are afraid of doing it. There's a lot of personal beliefs that people have. I don't agree with that. Okay. There is no major medical association that says this is how you're supposed to do it. So when you are in court being sued for what you did, what do you point to and say this is the standard of care? There is none. It's all off-label. None of these drugs are approved to treat transgender people for gender anything. Completely all off-label. And we live in a litigious society, so everybody's afraid of that. Why do I do it? Ethics, autonomy. Basically, if you can go to some other doctor who will split your tongue in half and make you look like the lizard man, and you can make that decision as an informed adult, I think this is a lot less than that, and we let people do with body modification. But really the main reason and why I started doing it was suicidality. 41% of transgender people will attempt suicide by age 30. Just let that, that's an enormous number. 41% of them will try and kill themselves. They commit suicide at a rate higher than every other medical condition there is combined. Cancer, HIV, all of those diagnoses that are horrible, chronic pain, they still don't kill themselves anywhere near as much as gender dysphoria. So why do people have it?
Yeah, if that's reduced by half, that's a resounding success of the treatment. Good God. 41% is insane.
It is not a mental illness. It is effectively the modification of the neural architecture due to something. And here are some of the somethings. DES is diethylstilbestrol. It is a drug that was used basically back in the 30s to 70s in the US, elsewhere in the world more. It's 600 times stronger than estrogen. It's a super potent estrogen. And if you give it to somebody, you do so because they had a miscarriage. And it was a wonder drug called Desplex, and we handed it out like candy because if a woman had a miscarriage, you gave them this, the next one carried a term. What do you think happens when you expose a male fetus to a super estrogen throughout the entire pregnancy? I don't know. We do. It's this. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia is a virilization disorder related to 17 beta hydroxylase, 21 hydroxylase deficiencies. Aromatase excess or deficiency is when the aromatase enzyme, which copies basically blue hormones, androstenedione, testosterone, over to estrone, estradiol, that being either too strong or not strong enough can screw things up. Klinefelter's and intersex syndrome, XXY. Technically, all of these are under the intersex umbrella, which are disorders of sexual development, which is what we now call them, DSDs. So intersex, even as a word, we're not really using as much, because where do we draw the line as what is intersex? How far do you have to go to be considered intersex? We don't really have a description for that. De La Chapelle's super cool. You're XX, but due to a freak thing that occurs at conception, the SRY gene from a Y chromosome gets copied over to you. And so despite being XX, you have a penis and testicles and look like me. But they're XX, and they're infertile. PCOS, everybody knows PCOS. Androgen insensitivity syndrome. So this is in the media right now because of a runner called Castor Semenya.
Yeah, fuck that whole, I mean, that blows the whole hormone, yeah. Not hormone, that blows the whole, I lost the word. Chromosome. That blows the whole chromosome / genital thing out of the water, because people will often fall back on chromosomes. If, for example, you say, well, what about a person who has a deformity or has an injury or whatever, and they don't have a functioning genital set that associates with what you want to call them, based on like typical like gender norms or whatever. And it's like, well, what about this one? So, yeah.
She has partial androgen insensitivity syndrome.
I'd never heard of this before. That's really cool.
Castor has a vagina and breasts and looks like a very masculine woman. She's XY. This condition, if you have it, and I've seen this personally once. I had a 17-year-old girl who came to be completely unrelated to my transgender clinic, was the daughter of one of my other patients who'd never had a period. She just didn't have one. And that was weird. So they sent me in and I was, all right, well, let's check you out. I went to do the pap and she had no cervix. And I was like, okay, so this is either Müllerian agenesis or this. And when I karyotyped her, she was XY. It was not a fun diagnosis to give a young girl like that. What's really interesting is they're actually generally very attractive and ultra feminine. They're like the most feminine human you could possibly imagine because they have no functional testosterone ability whatsoever. No body hair, nothing. Prenatal exposure to estrogen, androgens, obviously. Psychological disorders, there is a strong association between autism spectrum and Asperger's and gender dysphoria. The CAG repeat sequence variance is pretty cool. So on the end of the testosterone receptor, just like how when you think about like trinucleotide repeat sequence diseases, the testosterone receptor is like AGTQ, AB, AG, AG, AT, AG, AT, you know, doing its thing. And then when you reach the end of the code for it, it goes CAG, 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 CAG a certain number of times. The more number of times, the more resistant it is, like the binding ligand energy, the Ka changes to hold off testosterone. The shorter it is, the more sensitive. I have seen people who have completely normal labs. I have a patient that has completely normal androgen labs, assigned female at birth and has a full beard. Completely normal. This is the only explanation I can have for it, is the receptor is ultra sensitive to the effects of testosterone. And of course, neuroanatomical structural variants. I include abuse history in here because it was formerly the cause of why people are transgender. They must have been abused as a kid. I have one patient, one in 1,500 that reports this. They identify as non-binary. They were physically, sexually, and emotionally abused as a kid. And to them, the idea of identifying as female is vulnerable and weak. And so they use they, them pronouns, and they don't identify as male, they don't identify as female, they just identify as what we call an NB.
That's interesting. I actually have a similar reaction to being identified as male in a lot of ways, because I associate that with different types of abusive behavior as well emotionally. And I find it really gross, and like certain types of intimate interactions I have trouble doing because they disturb me that way, because I associate myself in my head with somebody who is like in like a certain social position, I suppose, that's like physically repellent to me. So that's interesting. I had a lot of trouble getting used to my my voice when I was a teenager as a result of that. I am now, like I've sort of integrated it, but that was a hurdle. This is interesting.
Or a non-binary person, Slang is ENBYNB, if you see that written down. But basically, I included in because it's a thing. I have seen it. Like I have seen one case of what's called autogynephilia, which is where a patient sexualizes the idea of themselves as a woman, a male patient does, and then wants to transition for the sexual gratification aspect of it. I have seen it once in 6 years. So it is definitely not a common thing, but they do happen. Okay. So the overwhelming majority of women that have this disease, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, are same-sex attracted, like 99% of them. And the severity, so to speak, of their same-sex attraction is correlated with the degree of virilization. So the more severe the
Exactly, Dilvani.
disease, the gayer they are. That's a known phenomenon with them. This has been documented to death. But basically, if you have this and you're a woman, you're attracted to women, or maybe you're 1% that isn't as Catholic or something, I don't know. But the short and narrow here is that 5.2% of women with CAH identify as male. Statistically, 0.3% of women identify as male. Obviously, this is doing a thing. We can clearly see that that is a thing. It's blatantly obvious. There's a direct correlate. Prenatal exposure to DES, which we already talked about, it was first noted in 1954, known as male pseudohermaphrodism. They're seeing undescended testicles, hypospadias, and testicular feminization syndrome in boys. Then, of course, we started seeing archives of general psychiatry and other people doing about it, and then no one really cared because, you know, being gay at that time was not something people talked about. But when, you know, all the women started, the daughters of DES started getting vaginal clear cell adenocarcinoma, then all of a sudden they pulled it. But the reason I bring the DES up is I have a very interesting situation. So I have two patients that I just coincidentally had. They're both from the same area. They each decided the transition.
Fun fact, one of the reasons why I talk so weird is because, like, my internal voice when I'm writing is or Captain Janeway's from Star Trek Voyager. I don't know why I'm mentioning that, it's just it's...
Transition. So they came to me for the purposes of hormonal transitioning. They got a
Still gonna have a
23andMe done and discovered they had a sibling that they didn't know about. And they were like, oh my God. So they contacted each other and reached out. And the irony of this is that each of them was afraid to tell the other one,
week off after
brothers,
this. Good God.
that they had transitioned. They were so afraid that they had just gotten this sibling and that the sibling would be intolerant to the fact they were transgender. And then that would be it. Like that they finally found this person and then they wouldn't be there. The hilarity is that when one finally came out to the other one before they were going to meet, they're like, hey, just so you know, when I show up, I'm going to be wearing a dress. Because what they had seen for photographs prior to that was prior to them transitioning. The other person didn't reply. They didn't reply for like 24 hours, and my first patient was freaking out. And then
she does have a great voice. I don't have that voice, so it comes off very differently when I write that way, but yeah.
Finally, when they replied, they were like, I didn't know how to respond to this, but I'm also transgender. So they went and they looked up some of their medical history, and they had found out mom had multiple miscarriages beforehand. It was in the right time period for DES. One of the patients has hypospadias. It was like a whole thing. So it's really fascinating. It's just sheer coincidence down in Monroe. I had these two people who, one was given up for adoption and the other one was kept. That's how this panned out. Kind of wild. This is pretty much the most conclusive thing that I can use to point to bigotry and be like, you're wrong. When people are like, these people are mentally ill. I'm like, yep, here you go. No, they're not. They're not. Their brains are literally wired structurally to look like their preferred gender before the taking of any hormones whatsoever. So if I take a 18-year-old female who says, I identify as male, transgender man, and I scan his head in an MRI machine, the MRI machine will spit back to me, this is a male brain. We can actually do that. And we've been able to do this over and over again, starting at 2009 up to 2015 is the most recent time the study's been done. It's been repeated.
Now, this is falling into the same error that Lonerbox is falling into, unfortunately, but yeah.
4 times, same findings every single time. We structurally can see gender identity on neuroanatomy and neural architecture now. So, as
do people ever have trouble hearing you IRL Sunday? All the time. All the fucking time. It's an absolute nightmare.
I have said, this is definitely not a thing. And people are always like, these people are mentally ill, we should be treating them. And
learning how to project was such like a massive hurdle in early adulthood, late teens. I mean, like you're asking this, so probably I'm not displaying this or the results of this very well right now. But like doing like YouTube videos and whatnot has been extremely helpful in terms of learning how to actually project and space my sentences out. I was a very quiet, very timid person when I was younger. I'm actually, like, I've been told that, like, some of my interactions are intimidating, which baffles me. Because that's not how I perceive them at all. But
you know, with therapy and helping them out, we can't do that. We've tried. Extensively attempted to use counseling and SSRIs and everything.
Connor says, yeah, you just kind of need to keep in mind he's focusing specifically on gender dysphoria and assuming the people he's talking to are also medical professionals. Yeah, fair enough. Have a good night, Sirius. Oh, Sirius, did you want to come on still and talk? You can come on for a minute if you like. I wanted to continue this. I didn't realize you were on the clock.
Everything else to make these people feel better and congruent with their gender, but it would be no different than basically telling someone who has red hair that we don't accept your red hair and you have to dye it.
She's strikingly gorgeous. Yeah, Jenny was my crush growing up. I didn't know that she was my crush, but she absolutely was. That and Jodie Foster, who's very, very similar figure. President Sunday, would you say that gender dysphoria and being transgender are phenomenon that may often occur together but don't necessarily have to? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like... gender dysphoria. I mean... It depends on what you mean by gender dysphoria, right? Like, obviously you need to have some kind of impetus to identify against how society sort of classifies you without your input to begin with. Oh, you're not talking to me? Who are you talking about? Why must everything pure be about you? Well, do you see the name on the... Does it say Brooks? Does it say President Brooks on the channel?
Which is basically what they do.
Go with the program. It's all about me.
Until they come out. There's nothing they can do about it. They're stuck this way. Their neural architecture is wired this way. So the best that we can do for them in medicine is to at least make their external appearance congruent with how they feel about themselves. Secondary to that, taking the hormones actually gives them the sense of wellness that does not seem to come with the hormones they're other previously assigned. So it's really strange, is not only just does giving them estrogen give them more testosterone in the body that they want, when they're on that hormone, depression and other psychiatric things go away. The patient feels more well, which is really neat because whenever I meet a new trans patient and they come in with severe depression and they want to transition, I never start an SSRI before I start hormones because the overwhelming majority of them don't need it. Once they start hormones, the depression issue goes away. So I was under the impression for a while that there was this concept that the overwhelming majority of transgender people, if offered the opportunity to take a pill, go to bed, and wake up in the morning cis. Cis being is what you are if your gender identity, how you view yourself in your head, is the same as what you see when you look down, you are cisgender. Transgender, like think about chemistry, I mean cis and trans is opposite side, they've switched. With these people, I had always thought that they would respond accordingly to this, and they would say, yep, this is how I feel, and I would gladly take the pill and be cis right away. So I thought that, and I had this in my old lecture. And I recently updated it because it's not true. Actually, I polled my patients, and I got about, I think, 300 and something people. And what I effectively got was, where is it here? This is the replies that I got from people. Where am I looking at? There you go. So yeah, over 300 responses.
This has to be the most aesthetically perfect doctor in existence. Just as an aside, like, dear God, like, he's got it together.
30% of people said they would take the pill. The rest spoke really against it. Some people were very even offended that I had even talked about the possibility of such a pill and how it was threatening to their identity. And this is what they said, basically. I would never accept a pill that would make me happy with my assigned at birth gender. This would effectively be personality death. The person who existed after taking that pill would no longer be me. I'm a woman, and that's very important to who I am and how my experiences have been shaped. Now, if you offered me a magic, perfect, immediate transition button, I'd press that in a heartbeat. But the idea is this person viewed their identity, their gender identity, as core to who they were as a human being. Kind of like if you were to think about doing a lobotomy on someone, you would take out a piece of who they are. Those neurons...
Jodie Foster in what movie? I think of Contact in particular.
Those memories comprise effectively the essence of what that person is. So to remove that would remove that aspect of their person. Now, what was very fascinating about this is some of the things that people said here. Having contemplated that myself, I can appreciate their desperation. If there was a way to live happily without all the pain and loss, I would have done it in a heartbeat. For me, the magic pill was transition, but it was a...
If being trans requires an understanding of your gender as being different from your sex, and dysphoria can happen without your specific knowledge, people who are dysphoric don't need to be trans. I mean, that's true, though. Like, we have the whole, the trans able thing, right? Like, that's true. Like being dysphoric can, like, frequently attends being trans, I think is how I would put that. Because, of course, like, we think that you can be trans without being dysphoric. So these are separate things, right? So that makes sense.
Very bitter pill to swallow. Even knowing how hard it is and what they had to go through to do this, the social ostracization, the loss of family, jobs, like literally everything, they still would do it. And what was really fascinating is people early in transition, before starting, were like, give me the pill. But people who had already transitioned, who'd gone through the personality growth and changes as a human being, were like, no, I'm not doing that. This is who I am. And that was pretty neat to see that actually stratified out. So what about the surgery? Does the surgery actually work? Well, here you go. We'll start with first just hormones. So these are people talking about just hormones here, and even though they had undergone gender-affirming surgery, these are the general population responses. Approximately 4 out of 5 people report significant improvements across the board.
Anecdotally, order of like night and day improvement in terms of like partners who've undergone it. Like it's insane. Going from like barely functioning depressive suicidal ideation to, you know, pep in their step, happy, confident, like it's crazy how effective it is actually. That's why, like, when people are talking about, like, you can't give you know, young teens hormonal treatment therapy. You know, you can only allow irreversible hormonal changes to be dictated by the blind forces of chance and nature. It's laughable. It's absolutely laughable. No, these people are much better off afterwards. Almost universally.
That they are better life, better quality of life, sexual function, happiness, depression, all those things improved. When we look at surgery, the regret rate for surgery, this is the best study ever done. I'm on Reddit a lot, and there's a subreddit called The Donald, and it's obviously, you know, Donald Trump subreddit. And they constantly post this one study, this very small study that was done that talks about how all these people regretted having gender-affirming surgery. Yeah, it's a terrible study. This study was done over a 50-year time frame on 767 people who underwent gender-affirming surgery. Of them, 2.2% regretted having it done. LASIK, like getting your eyes corrected, has a 5% regret rate. So these people literally had their genitals reconstructed, and 2.2% of them were like, meh, I wouldn't do it again. That's the regret rate here. So this is legitimately how many people said that they benefited from having it done. That is probably below even the complication rate. I'd imagine way more than that many had complications or problems and it didn't turn out exactly as they wanted, and they were still happier and better off as a result. So how do I do it? How do we actually take somebody from one gender and transfer them to the other one? This is how it's basically done in your body, how you became the gender you are now that you express physically as your phenotype. So you have, and we're going to talk about 2, gender identity, gender expression, sexual identity. These things are all different, and I'll get into it later. But this is basically how humans make sex hormones. This is what I do all day. I look at these things, I order these labs, and I fix them. How is it done? Nearly everybody has to go through some form of psychiatric evaluation. Most of them have a WPATH letter, which is a letter from a therapist that says this person meets the criteria for gender dysphoria, and I think they'd be a good candidate for HRT.
Yes, somebody get the name of that study, please.
However, some of them do not, and those that do not are usually because they are from a lower socioeconomic class. They have Medicaid, like a Meridian or Molina or crappy insurance, and paying $175 an hour to a therapist for 6 months every week is not something within their price range. So for them, I offer something called informed consent. Informed consent is effectively what you give when you go get a tattoo. You say, I am an adult and I understand the risks and benefits of this. I will not do informed consent on someone who has a major psychiatric history. If you are bipolar with mania, you better not be manic when you come to me to do this. I will make sure you are stable before I will do it. If you have ever had psychosis of any kind, nope. You go to psychiatry for clearance. But if a perfectly educated and consenting, stable adult on no medicines comes to me and says, I want to do this, I go, okay. So I give them this form. And the form has every risk and benefit that can possibly happen. It's like 15 pages long. And they study it, and they learn it, and they go to this place called Transcend the Binary, where basically there are a bunch of doctors and pharmacists, people who volunteer their time to meet with these people and quiz them and make sure they truly understand. And if they do, they write them a letter that says, this patient understands the risks and benefits, and then they come back. And along with their physical examination and lab work, I start them, as we said there. Pretty much what I just talked about in terms of informed consent. All right, so here's where we begin. So female to male. So you have a kid. Any kid comes to you. I don't care whether you are internal medicine or family medicine or it doesn't matter. Kid comes to you and says, I want to transition. And they are pre-pubertal. They are not ready for hormones, so to speak. They wouldn't naturally be making their own. Just give them Lupron. All you do is you press pause on puberty, and it just stops. They stop growing breasts, their penis gets no bigger, their testicles get no bigger, they don't get any facial hair. It's just you keep them in kid stage, pause, and you give them time.
That's really, I didn't know they could do that. That's really smart, actually. That's actually a very conservative treatment, too. It's literally just like, hey, we're going to arrest these natural hormonal processes that we can't control. And we arrest natural hormonal processes all the time. Every time you cure cancer, that's what you're doing, right? Every time you correct a deformed organ or a limb, or you add in a stent, you add in a prosthetic, like you're not allowing natural processes to govern the outcome. The fact that people in wheelchairs can survive means that we don't allow like the raw forces of nature to determine how human beings end up. This is really, I didn't realize we could. I did actually, though. I know about hormone blockers, but I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd always thought of it as like a transition treatment by itself. I hadn't thought of it as buying time. That's interesting. And I think that's typically how it's talked about in sort of anti-trans right-wing circles, or gender essentials. Or I'm not sure what the term I want to use is, but they'll talk about hormone blockers as if hormone blockers were themselves transition hormonal therapy, but they're not. They're buying time to think about it. That makes a lot of sense.
The total risk of doing this is if they're on Lupron for many years, their end bone mineral density will not be as high as it would have been had they gone through puberty earlier. But that's about it. That's pretty much the risk. The other risk is they kill themselves, which to me is like, when you're 70, your bone mineral density versus you die at 11. So I block these kids. I say, yep, you're blocked. Your hormones are blocked. Go to gender therapy. And they go. And they go to see psychiatry and gender therapists, and they figure out whether or not this is the right thing for them. For some kids, it is. For some, it's not. They literally will grow out of it. It's a phase they went through for whatever reason, but for the ones that don't, they come back. We start them on HRT when is the age-appropriate time, which is effectively puberty.
Hormone blockers also makes it easier to transition later as the wrong secondary characteristics don't have to be done. Well, exactly. You don't have to surgically remove breasts. You don't have to surgically remove testicles. Well, I mean, you still with testicles, of course, but like breasts. You don't have like a trans woman who has to deal with the fact that they have like a really like big jaw and like facial hair and things like that. Like that stuff can like fucking hell. Especially given the fact that like dress is gender dress is almost entirely built around that. Like it's got to be a nightmare. It's got to be an absolute nightmare. Like you'd have to overcome the hegemony of that over your emotions, and that would be brutal. This doc is like fantastic. I've got like a weirdly asexual male crush on this guy. It's bizarre. This is like the most aesthetically perfect doctor I've ever seen. Like voice is perfect, presentation is perfect. This is just fantastic. Whoop! There goes my Rubik's Cube, which I've never to this date solved.
Lupron is the drug that's used to do this. Every now and again, I have a female to male patient who can't use Lupron or they can't get it covered. I'll use anastrozole, which is an aromatase inhibitor, which blocks the conversion of the blues to the pinks.
My anti-trans friend says his concern is with some children are some children are influenced by maliciously Sorry. Very drunk, my apologies. My anti-trans friend says his concern is some children are influenced maliciously by parents, /professionals, /others to make an irreversible decision to transition. Puberty blockers aren't irreversible, though. Like, case in point, when you go on to testosterone, I know this because I've got somebody living with me right now who's on testosterone. When you've got somebody on testosterone, they go through what's called like a second puberty. And it's exactly what it sounds like. So.
Basically, in order to treat someone for a female to male hormonal transitioning, we use testosterone in pretty much any imaginable form. Don't use DHEA because it just gets metabolized into more female hormones. It's a myth that works in that way. It actually makes their problem worse. But a lot of people think that this is a good idea. But in general, I use about 100 milligrams a week injectable. There is oral testosterone in Europe. It's not a thing we really have. We have a small thing called Estratest, which is like a...
The trans autism connection is pretty interesting, IMO. My partner and a couple of my friends are both, and all of them say that being on the spectrum might have made it easier for them too. I think also too, like, autism as a category is woefully underdefined. And I think I think to a certain extent it's kind of bunk. Like, I think within the Asperger's spectrum is I guess the autism spectrum. I don't know. It seems to me that there's a lot in there that could be encompassed. It's over-encompassing, is what I'm getting at.
Little dose of testosterone for postmenopausal women with low libido. It's not nearly enough to transition with, and it's not something I would recommend because it has increased coagulability problems.
What's the name of this doctor? This is William J. Powers.
But basically, injectable T or transdermal T are how pretty much everybody does, with the exception of some very rare patients who get something called a testopel, which is a testosterone implant, and you replace them every 4 to 6 months. So you get some rapid changes that occur and some changes that take a little longer. Some of the things that are changed is the increased musculature and decreased body fat, development of facial and body hair, deepening of the voice, male pattern baldness, which happens way more often than people wish it did, but it's the trade-off you make. Enlargement of the clitoris is like almost immediate. Like we're talking within weeks, it'll start to grow.
By the way, if you're dealing with male pattern baldness, just shave it off, honestly. See, because people choose to shave off all of their hair as a fashion choice all the time. So if you're worried about, like, I'm not entirely sure why people have an issue with it, frankly. Like, some people look tremendous with like a balding scalp. I drew the short straw genetically, so I have had like a super high hairline my entire life since I was a baby. And so people joke about that. It's like, oh, your hairline's going back. It's like, no, it's just, it started there. But, like, you can look really good that way. Like Tywin Lannister. I mean, granted, he's older, but Tywin Lannister, right? His hairline's like way back here. He looks fucking fantastic. That actor, Charles Dance. Great looking. Who's that guy from Breaking Bad? What's his name? Bryan Cranston. Like, case in point, he looks younger bald and looks sharper bald. Even with the broad definition of autism, the term to me is more so helpful for getting people in the headspace to make accommodations when needed. Yeah, fair enough. That makes sense.
Growth spurt and closure of growth plates. So the interesting part about this is that when it
you ever see pictures of samurais? They'd be in their 20s that have like their head shaved like, and they have a little tuft.
Comes to treating trans women and trans
and
men,
like the thing in the back.
I tend to let the trans men kids, like female to male, go.
The trick at the end of the day to owning any look and making it work, it actually has nothing to do with the look itself. You can have like the most discordant, sloppy whatever. It's entirely confidence and character. If you can be a competent and useful person, and you can have confidence, and you can be brave, and you can be all these good things, your quirkiness and things that you might even reflexively think of as your ugliness, those make you interesting. Those are cool.
Longer on Lupron. And the reason for this is that they grow taller. So testosterone and estrogen close epiphyseal growth plates. So if you hold them open longer by not giving them the hormones earlier, they grow taller and they fit into society better. which is very much a heightist, sort of thing. But regardless, if the end goal is for them to pass, I try and get them as tall as I can. So this is kind of effectively, if you think about it, why you see a lot of transgender women. This is my theory, total theory, but that you see transgender women who are very tall, like inordinately tall, like 6'6", and they tend to stand out, and you're like, wow, those trans women are tall. Like collectively, my transgender women are probably like 5'10". Like they are taller than average would be for the average American man. And I think this is because of resistance to testosterone due to whatever other genetic mutations they have, and they have a ton of them that I could go through, results in longer growth plates. My trans men, it's the opposite. They tend to be shorter, much, much shorter, usually between 5 foot and 5'3". And that's just the way it works out. So I believe that this is the reason why it's linked. One of the coolest things you can do if you really want to be Dr. Off-label like me is you can use minoxidil, which is Rogaine, on the face. Do not do this until the patient has peach fuzz. And by peach fuzz, I mean like, you ever been driving along in the car and the sun is setting and you look over to your left at your mom or whatever female person you have in your life and you're like, oh my God, their face is so hairy. Right? We've all experienced that. It's the light refracting through the light on their face, their vellus hair, okay? Some people have more vellus hair than others, but if you have a lot of vellus hair to begin with, when you start using tea, it starts to thicken to become that sort of peach fuzz that then becomes facial hair. Minoxidil causes the transformation of vellus hair into terminal hair. Subsequently, you can use it on the face, but don't do this until effectively you have gotten fuzzies or you are wasting their time, and getting somebody to be compliant with a thing that they rub onto their face once or twice a day is difficult, especially when they don't see any results. When the results that they do see is all of the hair that they've grown so far falling out, if you do not warn them about it, they will stop using the drug. Ironically, this is the stage when it's the most important, because why it's falling out is the transformation from vellus to terminal, and that middle velo-terminal stage causes a shedding event. The hair cells basically die off, drop the shed, they lose the hair, and then they start again with a new, stronger terminal follicle that makes you can hear the scritchies. That's it. That's terminal hair. That's what you're trying to make. This drug will do that. I can get a beard on somebody in under a year, which is pretty wild, where otherwise it takes years to build that. And you think about pubertal boys, they get the dirt stash and blah, blah. Like my patients are like year and a half out and they have a full beard. All right, so I do something unusual. There are two types of genital surgery for trans men. One is called a phalloplasty, where we create a neopenis, and the other is a metoidoplasty.
I've got a plan for this.
It used to be you can basically have your penis or feel it too. That is no longer the case. There are some new surgeries that actually give you a sensory phallus. But for the longest time, that was basically your options. We basically sever the clitoris, pull it out, and then more or less attach it there, and it becomes sort of a small penis. And then there's testicular implants that can be placed into the labia, and there's a vaginectomy. The vagina canal is closed, and this is what you get. I'm able to achieve considerably greater growth than other doctors.
That's fine. It's blurry enough. I don't think YouTube cares.
Because I dreamed up this idea of using incredibly concentrated testosterone directly to the clitoris. So they literally use 15%, which is about 10 times stronger than androgel, and they put it directly on the clitoris every day, and it grows. And they are beating my door down to get it, because people are coming and be like, I heard you got this cream. And like, it's just spreading throughout the community. It's a thing that I've dreamed up, but nobody's done it before. It actually is very interesting. I don't have a slide in here yet, but I should, about the fact that I actually use a compounded weak testosterone, a 0.5% or weaker, on the penises of transgender women. A lot of times the corpora, the internal structure, doesn't get any smaller. That stays the same, but the skin atrophies. So you end up with like an overwrapped kielbasa. So when they get an erection, it is extremely painful, and the skin can split.
Oh, that's horrific. Oh, God. Hang on. Wait. No, he didn't do that to people, did he?
About the fact that I actually use a compounded weak testosterone, a 0.5% or weaker, on the penises of transgender women. A lot of times the corpora, the internal structure, doesn't get any smaller. That stays the same, but the skin atrophies. So you end up with like an overwrapped kielbasa. So when they get an erection, it is extremely painful, and the skin can split.
Oh, God. Can they fix that? Oh, fucking hell, that's horrific.
just like kind of a postmenopausal woman's vagina. So what I do for them is I give them this low-dose topical tea applied to the penis, which regenerates the tissue, softens
Oh, thank
it.
God. Okay, good. Whew. Jesus Christ, that was disturbing. Okay. Oh, I see. No, that's the thing that can happen to trans women on testosterone. No. He's talking about postmenopausal women and trans women. So women who have penises. That's what he's talking about, Ron. Oh, God. Alright. Post a 1 into chat if you're, like, clenching your legs really tight, chat.
Gives its elasticity back. The other reason is that I do it is on my male to female kids who were blocked. They don't really grow much of a penis because they don't have the testosterone to make it grow. So there's a very famous transgender girl named Jazz Jennings who went through her whole surgery thing and outline, and the biggest complication she had was her vagina was about this deep. And it was because Jazz had never been allowed to go through regular puberty, which means that she had more or less been a toddler penis. It never grew any, and that's what they were able to use to make the tissue to do the neovagina. So as funny as it is to say, about 6 months before any of my patients go for gender-affirming surgery, I start slathering them up with 0.5% testosterone every day. This will make the biggest, strongest penis possible to go into battle that you're going to use to turn into a neovagina. This is very important to do this because they've often spent 4, 5, 10 years on blockers and have experienced significant genital atrophy as a result. The same can also happen in reverse to transgender men, but not as often. Testosterone seems to be a little friendlier to the vagina, whereas estrogen is a thing that just does not work on trans women's penises. Like, don't even bother. Estrace will not work to help them with this issue. Same idea with male to female. Lupron is used to do the blockade.
Don't misunderstand, he gives trans women a testosterone ointment because it keeps the skin from atrophying and causing issues. Yeah, I got that. It's just like, Jesus Christ, the thing he was describing was horrific. Oh, thank God. Sorry, for a brief second, I had misheard from him because I'd answered chat, I think, and I'd lost the plot a little bit. I thought he was, like, applying, like, something that caused this atrophy, and then they'd have, like, extraordinarily painful stuff, and then that would split. No? It's like... The human body is a horrible place.
There is a tremendous discussion and argument over what is the best way of doing hormones. It's mine, I assure you. But it's not really a thing that has been settled on anybody yet. So I'll present to you mine and the other options, and you guys can decide for yourselves. Male to female, I mean, you get feminization, breast development, adipose redistribution, testicular atrophy, possible infertility. So infertility is a thing that people talk about a lot, and I actually have not experienced it that much with my patients. So when I have a transgender woman who decides that they want to father children and they still have not had an orchiectomy and they would like to produce sperm, I stop their blockers, I stop their estrogen, I stop everything, and I put them on a drug called Clomid. Clomid is also used for fertility purposes in women, clomiphene, but it increases the LH and FSH secretion from the pituitary.
Frankly, at the point where you have, like, the skin splitting when you have an erection, just cut it off. For me personally, like, I mean, it's curable, thank God, but, like, Jesus Christ, that is horrifying. Like, can you imagine that? Ugh. Okay, we're 31 minutes in. We said we were going to go for 30 minutes. And I think he covered a lot. This is really interesting. We have to get through Lonerbox. There's 10 minutes left. Can we do it? Can we do it? Can we... It's 10 minutes. We'll go through 10 minutes of that. We'll finish it. And then we'll do a few more minutes of this. This is 2 hours long. We're not going to go through all this tonight. It's 1 a.m. here already. But let's do that, okay? Yeah, let's do that. So let's finish Lonerbox. We'll see what's wrong with this. And then we will go back.
Going on here. If this really is the case for trans people, it would suggest that biological sex and gender identity are not completely separate. And given that the body and brain develop at different times and biological sex is already kind of messy, it isn't hard to imagine the idea of the body sometimes going one way and the brain going another. The real question is,
except the brain's a part of the body.
How do we group people when their gender identity is misaligned with their body? If you're a sex essentialist, you would just say follow the gonads because...
But okay, but you're being a sex essentialist here, right? Like you're assigning sex now just to a different organ. So it doesn't... Like, would you tell someone who has like all of the same self-descriptions and all the same issues as like a trans woman that they're not trans because their brain on analysis looks different? No, of course not.
That's the most literal definition of sex. But biologists don't seem to think it's that simple, and you can demonstrate that without even referring to trans people.
He means mind Sunday? No, he doesn't, because he's talking about brains that were analyzed post-mortem. He's talking about brains.
Let me introduce you to congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Congenital meaning the condition is present at birth, and adrenal hyperplasia meaning their adrenal glands are slightly larger than usual. Now that doesn't sound like much, but within this group, there is such a thing as people who have XX chromosomes and ovaries, but also fully formed penises. So, what do we do here? Well, if you saw one of them newly born, you'd probably just assume they were male, but when these people ended up in hospitals, doctors would traditionally identify them as females because I guess they thought eggs come first? But this decision was later criticized as a dogmatic approach to gender assignment, and people have since argued to categorize them as males. And one of their reasons for making this argument was that the patients, despite their mixed biology, all identified as males. In other words, their gender identity overrode what we would typically understand as their biological sex. So when we're asking the question, is the innate gender identity of a trans woman enough to include her in the...
Well, that's tricky though, right? Biological sex, but you said they have like fully formed like penises. Like, which do you put the stress on? If XX nonetheless produces fully formed penises, then why would you privilege the chromosomes as making them biologically female as opposed to vice versa? Like surely the essentialism is downstream from function, from reproductive function. Like that is at least something that's sort of concrete. Like you do need, like we're a sexually dimorphic species. So in that respect, there is that binary because that's literally how our architecture works. But well, not even really though, right? I mean, yes, in a way. Because like it's not just a matter of having like the two different. Lonerbox is too loud. Turn it down. Oh, right. I boosted the volume for the other guy. We'll have to reset it later.
The category of woman, I would say the answer is yes, and here's why. Suppose you woke up one day and your brain had been placed in someone else's body. You still have your memories, your conscious experience, your sense of self, and all that. But every other part of your body is someone else's. Now, are you or are you the other person? Bob, would you feel more comfortable if people addressed you by your name or by Bob's name? Now, okay, this is a rhetorical question, but the answer is you would still be you, and f*** you, everyone agrees with me. And I know that because I remember the body swap scene from Scooby-Doo.
Like, why am I wearing a dress? Everyone remain calm. Velma, the heck's going on?
If my calculations are correct, due to the fragile nature of unstable...
And that is...
Well, hang on a second, though. Slow down, Lonerbox, because what if you did like the whole 1984 thing and you tortured somebody into avowing all the same things as somebody else? You effectively put somebody else's brain into that person's body. Would that therefore mean that that thing that has been like brute forced into these behaviors, that these were more authentically them? I don't think that's obvious. He cites both types of studies because the sociologists also consider them, but in the end disparage evopsych and neurobiopsych like good analytical postmoderns. I don't know what you're referring to. Sorry. Prove you end at the edge of your body. Hmm. Well, I mean, prove you end at the edge of your brain, I suppose.
Is not even the best example. Do you know who else agrees with me on this? J.K. Rowling agrees with me. When Harry drank the polyjuice potion and found himself in Goyle's body, did he stop being Harry? Or better, when Hermione drank the polyjuice potion with a cat hair on it, did she become the cat?
No, but if Harry had remained in Goyle's body for a prolonged period of time, like a lot of his personality would change, no? Like the way he interacts with his environment would change. The way people interact with him would change. The way he perceives himself would change. Like a lot would change. Mind Sunday, not brain. Well, like, what do you mean by that? Like the mind as opposed to the brain, or the mind as opposed to the body. Like you're even your sense of self, and we like to think of our minds as being somehow sharply disconnected from like the incidences of our biological features, but it's not clear that that's the case. Like, we assume certain modes of interaction with the world that we wouldn't if we were missing limbs or if we had additional limbs. We assume certain forms of modes of interaction with the world based upon, like, the kinds of sense organs that we have and where they're placed. And, there are social foils to this. A woman in a certain culture, or in a certain time period in a certain culture, has different, to use sort of Gibsonian language, has different affordances in the world than a man does. You're right and wrong, and there's an example that demonstrates that. Barty Crouch impersonated Alastair Moody for months with some success. Yeah, and we developed a rapport with Alastair Moody that persisted despite the fact that the Alastair Moody in Order of the Phoenix and the Deathly Hallows was a completely different person.
No. Every cell in her body was that of a cat. Well, maybe not her brain. I don't know how that works. Magic. But all the same, she was still Hermione because her identity, her sense of self, came first. She wasn't mentally ill. She wasn't delusional. She knew exactly what was going on with her body, and when she acknowledged that her mind was out of congruence with her body, she wasn't wrong. In fact, being in the cat's body was kind of distressing for her. She didn't want to come out of the cubicle. What she was experiencing was a kind of dysphoria, perhaps. And if the polyjuice potion was irreversible, the treatment for that dysphoria would have been to bring her body back into line with who she identified as. For society to recognize her as Hermione the girl and not the cat, whatever its name was. Trans-positive J.K. Rowling arc. We can be hopeful. Now, of course, no one is treating the idea of the sexed brain as settled science. The brain is complex. You're complex. I'm complex. Your mum is complex. In fact, there's so much variation that the idea of there being any kind of gender binary of the brain is completely out. I guess you could make one objection. We do know about a few differences in the brain between trans and cis people, but none of these actually tell us what it is in the brain that makes a person trans. To which I would argue that burden of...
Well, hang on. Do we actually, though? Like, it seems to me that a cis person is just somebody who feels no discomfort with their gender designation or their sex designation, and it's that simple as that. That's literally it. It's just somebody for whom the arbitrary allotment by society and by chance and by biology just has no... It's just inconsequential. That seems to be it, but that doesn't seem to be like a really substantive distinction ultimately. Like there are people who I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
proof isn't really needed. We still don't even know what makes a person gay, but we have nonetheless managed to come this far by treating homosexuality as something that is innate and immutable. Or you might be thinking, hey Lonerbox, isn't this all just kind of like a trans medicalist argument?
Wait, this is wrong. Gender dysphoria doesn't equal trans status. Yeah, I agree. That's the problem with this video. He's still trying to refer it to a biological base, which is a mistake.
No. Transmedicalism is the idea that you need gender dysphoria to be trans, and depending on who you ask, it also rejects non-binary identities, but I would argue that the concept of brain sex is actually a good argument against transmedicalism.
Well, no, it's not though, because you're still again referring to a biological organism and or to a biological organ, and you're still referring being trans to a specific physical state. You're still trying to find like a biological source for dysphoria as the basis of being trans. Now, maybe a biological site of dysphoria, which of course there is, because we're biological beings, we're physical beings, we're physical structures in the world. But we're also social beings, and we also have like this whole additional like net that's laid over our interactions and our identities that is not tied down specifically to our biology.
If our knowledge of trans identity is still this limited, would it really be wise to gatekeep that behind one single diagnosis? Is it really impossible for someone to have that incongruence without having the intense psychological distress of gender dysphoria? I find that hard to believe, and it looks like medical professionals feel the same. As for non-binary identities, we've already shown how the concept of distinct male and female brains is kind of dated, as in wrong. If anything, the brain is probably the least binary aspect of your sex. We already know about ambiguous genitalia and ambiguous karyotypes.
I feel like this contradicts what he said earlier in the video, but I suppose I'll take it tentatively because I want to come back to this when I haven't grossly overestimated my alcohol tolerance. But yeah.
So why would there not be ambiguous brain sex as well? I mean, I personally do know what ambiguous brain sex feels like. Just ask your mom. Part 4. Conclusion. When people talk about whether woman is a matter of biology, identity, or social construction, I always feel like they're framing it like there's some kind of triple threat match between the three of them. My own opinion is that it's kind of all of them. Take the example of Patricia Davies, the World War II veteran who lived publicly as a man until the age of 90 before finally coming out in 2017. Like many trans people, Davies learned that she was trans incredibly early on in her life, at the age of 3 to be exact. Given that this was in the early 1930s, I doubt the progressive media can take the blame for that one. Whether or not you want to call it biological, her identity was innate to her and it wasn't going anywhere. Because the social understanding of trans women didn't even exist at the time, she chose to live her life as a man. After all, the alternative would have been electroshock therapy, being outcast as a homosexual, jailed, or whatever else. But in 1987, she came out privately to her wife, and in 2017, in a society with a very different understanding of Matt Walsh's little question, she was finally able to start hormone therapy and live as a woman. So when a good honest truth seeker comes up to you and says, "What is a woman?" there are a few answers you can give. You can say a woman is an adult human female. You can ask them to explain what exactly an adult human female is, and
it sounds like heartwarming and everything, but at the same time, like, that person must have had a rough life. That wouldn't have been fun.
Watch as they try not to reduce women down to their breeding parts. You can talk about how a trans woman is a woman who is assigned male at birth, which is perfectly within the realms of science and the same dictionary that gave you the definition of woman. Or you can just invoke old Ludwig and define it the way we define all kinds of things. By examples. This is a woman. This is a woman. This is a woman. This is not a woman. Your mom is a woman. Bye.
Dies illa solvet seclum in favela teste David cum Sibylla quantus tremores futuras quando iudex venturas constas tristes descasuras dies illa solvet seclum in favela teste David cum Sibylla.
Okay, we got it. Back to the cool suave doctor.
Which thereby kind of restores the testicles, and they can go from these atrophied little wimpy.
Wait, hang on. We need the unicorn of purity. Just in case. Just in case. You're going to be over here, and you will come to our defense to shield our virgin eyes.
Squishy grapes to being like solid, hard, large marbles within the span of about 2 to 3 months. Then they can give themselves a sperm donor, or they can do whatever they need to do to drop their sample or impregnate their partner, and then go right back to how they were before. And I have done this a bunch. So I've actually not had a patient that was infertile that I couldn't fix, except for the ones that had an orchiectomy. And there's nothing I can do about that. Once you've had that, that's pretty much the end of the game. Anyways, so same sort of things in reverse. This is an interesting slide. So when I start people out, I start them between 6 and 10 milligrams a day, spread over the course of the day. Ideally, I would love to have them dose it 5 times a day, but few people are that compliant, so I usually am happy with 3, like 4 milligrams in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 4 at night. Almost every other doctor will tell you, take all your pills at once, it doesn't matter. That's wrong, and here's why. When you spread the dose over the course of the day, they don't crash. These people who are dosing 10 milligrams of estrogen first thing in the morning, 12 hours later, they've half-lifed out 3 times. They feel like shit. And they always wonder, I'm so tired in the evening. Well, yeah, because you have hormones only part of the day. And that is absolutely not how an ovary works. It's not like an ovary wakes up at 8 a.m. and like has its morning coffee, squirts out some estrogen, and then goes to sleep for the remainder of the day. It doesn't work like that. So why would we do this to humans? I don't know, but I don't.
Oh, Frabjous Day, Kalu Kale, we are back. Did y'all get your water? I got my water. What about you, Walsh's unicorn? Did you get your water? Fabulous. Thank you, Eggle Higgle, for the $5. Defense, rah-rah.
Amount of estrone than estradiol. I think this may be actually related to the development of their gender dysphoria, and we're going to talk about it. Now, earlier you saw this slide, and on that slide, this arrow went like this, just down. That is wrong. And it has historically been taught that way, and it is wrong. And specifically, the reason it's wrong is there's 2 enzymes there, 17-beta oxidoreductase and hydroxylase, which are involved in the processing of those 2 hormones. It goes in reverse. It is reversible. And I have found increased or mutations of increased function going one direction or decreased in the other direction, which screws up this ratio. So, what does it matter? Well, let's say that you have a patient, and we're going to just follow the W path standard here really quick, not my methods. We're going to say the W path. So, estradiol, you get it back, it's 100. To me, that's too low. I like it over 300. But WPATH likes them 100 to 200, so they say that's okay. Great, all right, everything's fine, keep transitioning, have a good day. I get your estrone back. And while your estradiol is 100, this is 500. Most cis women are really around 100, never over 200 ever. Their physiologic range never goes that high. So, what's up with that? Oh, I better lower your estrogen. Yeah, your dose is not enough. Here, you don't have enough estrogen. I need to increase it to get you closer to 200. Oh, nope, you have too much. I have to decrease your dose. Oh, nope, here's your total estrogen. This is pretty much peak ovulatory levels. This is fine. Depending on which lab you ordered and how you looked at this patient, you would come to the wrong conclusion. Which is why my whole point is estrone is a key component that you need to measure when you're looking at this. Estrone also is important to measure in any of your women that have had breast cancer or a thrombotic event, because it is implicated in the development of both. So, as we talked about here, the effective estradiol level in this patient is much lower than 100 picograms per milliliter. So let's imagine this. All right, so we got these chairs over here, okay? These are estrogen receptors. So let's say we have 10 guys up here wearing estrogen shirts, and they're like, I'm estradiol, 10 of them. And then I have 50 wearing estrone shirts, and we play musical chairs. What assortment of people are you going to get in there? I mean, obviously, 5 out of 6 chairs are going to be occupied by the people wearing the estrone shirts, because there's way more of it. But they both bind to the receptor. It's just that when the estrone binds, it only gives 4% of the effect. Subsequently, the irony of this is that giving transgender women who have this mutation estradiol creates an enormous amount of estrone in their liver, which then competes with the estradiol for the receptor binding site. So they start transitioning and then stop, because they get the initial feminization burst from estrogens effectively, and then they can never get past that. They just get stuck. And the reason I dreamed this up is I'm like, why are people keep saying this, shots are better, I couldn't transition until I went to shots. I'm like, what would the difference be between oral and shots? Like, I don't get it. And I started looking into the biochemistry of this until I finally dreamed this up with Sigrid, who I quoted at the beginning of the lecture, who I gave credit to. Brilliant woman. But anyways, the relative speed of the enzyme, the 17-beta-hydroxysteroid oxidoreductase and hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, is interchangeable. So depending on where your mutations are, how many allelic polymorphisms you have in either direction, you're going to either go towards this end of the reaction or the other end. And this is important for transitioning. What's really weird is that I have found elevated estrone levels in transgender women who later went on to have screwed up ratios in this problem before they started transitioning. Meaning their body was taking, when they had non-elevated levels of total estrogen. Their total estrogen is like borderline high or normal, but their estrone is high because they're shunting into this. Now, I think that this is particularly interesting because I have previously been like, estrone's bad, no, terrible estrone. I've been doing that for years once I discovered this. What I recently figured out was that the patients that I started on pills that I switched to shots ended up having better feminization and larger end-stage breasts than the patients I started on shots. And I couldn't figure out why that was. And so I started to think about it, and when we talk about thelarchy, which is the development of breasts before menarche, thelarchy is the development of the breast bud and then its initial formation. That comes from the adrenal glands primarily, from estrone being released in the adrenals. After that happens, eventually there is an inversion when the ovaries kick on, and then you start to progress to Tanner 3, Tanner 4, then you start cycling and you having a period, and then you progress to Tanner 5 and the breasts round out. So I realized, maybe this would be better. So I actually let my patients stay on oral pills even if they have a crappy ratio for 6 to 12 months, then I switch them. Because effectively I'm mimicking thelarchy in a cis girl who would go through the same sort of thing. What's really interesting, and I have yet to totally suss out the mechanism for this, I've had patients that have been on shots for an extremely long time frame, like 3, 4, 5 years, where they are considered done. This is as far as they're going to progress, no more further feminization. And I added an oral dose of 2 milligrams at bedtime, swallowed, not sublingual, not buccal, swallowed, deliberately creating estrone. And all of a sudden they start progressing again. Despite the fact that their estrone level goes up against this ratio. It almost seemed contrary to my theory, but I believe the mechanism for this is that the estrone is actually uptaken into the cell and converted to a different form called E1S, estrone 1 sulfatase, or sulfate. The sulfatase enzyme is the thing that does it. And that form, E1S, hangs out and does nothing. It's sulfated, it just chills. But it can be pulled immediately and then converted to estradiol intracellularly. Now, the serum drifting around estradiol around your body, yeah, that's great that you have that and you have a high level, but it doesn't do anything unless it's inside the cell. This is picked up easier and taken into the cell. So it acts as a reservoir for E1S, and in these patients who've been on shots a really long time, who might have a depleted estrone reservoir, it seems to re-trigger growth in them. So what I do now is when somebody's maxed out, like totally maxed out, I give them this oral dose for a month. And if they start progressing again, they start getting more breast development, I have a phrase that I say all the time, which is sore boob is more boob. If they're sore, they're growing. That's a general marker for it. If they develop tenderness again, then we continue with this. If they don't, I don't do it past a month. All right, so as I talked about, I start them all that way. If the ratio is poor, I switch them to injectable. If the ratio is good, they can be maintained that way. I'd say, even since I would say about half now. I really should update this. I used to say about a third to a quarter, but I'd say about half of them have this genetic issue where they just cannot process it properly. There are the options for transdermal estrogen and implants. I rarely use these. Mostly because I can never seem to get as high of a level as I would like, but I have a couple patients who have the mutation with the estrone issue, and they are just terrified of needles. They just won't use them. They're just like, no shots. And I'm like, okay, well, you're stuck how you are, or this. And the option is either transdermal gel or usually 2 to 3 max dose patches simultaneously. There is also estrogen implants, but they're not approved in the US through any sort of like FDA okayed drug, like Testopel is the testosterone one. There isn't an estrogen one. But you can get it compounded at a compounding pharmacy and then do the same thing. It does exist in Europe. So this is what I think is going on here. And this is just a theory, so you can take it with a grain of salt, but I believe that this is actually the cause of why a lot of these people turn out to be transgender women. So if you have this mutation, which I said about half of my patients do, where they crank out this massive estrone level. So when I say that, to be clear, they'll have an estradiol of 100, 150, and I'll measure their estrone. Someone broke the record the other day by having an estradiol of 100 and an estrone of 38.27. Normal estrone is 100 to 200. So that gives you a concept of like how bad the mutation was in them. What they are effectively doing is I'm giving them estrogen. Their liver is like, cool, estrone, pile, and it just starts stacking up more and more and more. Well, if you think about it, what is the other time that a male fetus, besides being a transgender woman, would be exposed to estrogen? Pregnancy. So in pregnancy, you are exposed to mom's estradiol. I eliminated my mom's. I just went, nope, and got rid of it because I don't need it, and my body produced its own androgens, which is why I turned out with my SRY gene expression to be a boy. I am a boy, if you hadn't known. I do also identify as one. But if you have this mutation, you're going to take mom's estrogen and you're going to crank it into estrone. Now, mind you, estrone isn't a super powerful estrogen, but we already know it's enough to at least give people breasts. So if you're exposed to this throughout your entire development period by taking mom's estradiol, converting it to estrone, and building up this reservoir inside your fetal body, what do you think is going to happen to your neural architecture? Well, I don't know. It's not like we don't have a comparative analysis in DES, which shows us exactly what happens when we expose a developing fetus to high levels of estrogens. So this is why I think at least some transgender women who have this mutation are trans because of this mutation. And the sick irony of it is that later in life, when they go to try and actually transition, you put the hormones back in, it makes it harder because their body actually fights them by converting the estradiol I'm using to estrone. So this is an example of a patient just like what I was talking about. I really should use my new patient, the one I just got the crazy labs on the other day, because it's even more pronounced than this one. But basically, this patient had an estradiol of 78 and an estrone of 2100 when I checked it. They were told that this is as far as they could go. They've been on hormones for like 10 years, and that was it. They were kind of happy with how far they had progressed with their transition. But their prior doctor had only been checking the estradiol level. They ranged anywhere from like 80 to 200, and everything was fine. 4 months after I correct their ratio, I saw them as a patient. I'm like, hey, listen, you have this thing. Let me fix this for you. And they were like, very suspicious, because when someone's been doing the same thing for 10 years, it's hard to convince them to change. But they did. They listened to me, and holy crap, did they change. We're talking they went from like a small B to a D by the end of the year. And within 4 months, it was blatantly obvious that I had done something very different with this patient. They were thrilled, because they had thought that they had gone as far as they could go. And it was because they had this mutation. I have seen this, which I'm trying to figure out right now. Norvir and cobicistat, in my African-American transgender women, are 57% HIV positive. I'll repeat that. 57% of my African-American trans women are positive already. That's real. White is about 7 to 12% depending on the state. So in short, a lot of them I have on HIV treatment. I also treat HIV, the thing I do in my clinic. And a lot of the older / middle and not the brand newest drugs, but the ones from maybe the past 5 years to 10 years ago, use this, cobicistat. It's a booster. It basically inhibits the cytochrome P450 enzyme, keeping the level of the drug higher in the serum. Norvir did the same thing. And they screw with estrogen metabolism. So it also makes this problem even worse. So I would recommend if you have a transgender woman you're fixing this problem on, and they're on one of these drugs, consider one that is an unboosted regimen. I'm not the first person to discover this. It's kind of crazy. This has been known in medical literature for literally almost 15 years. 2005, varied routes of administration affects the way that estrogen metabolism is done. Right here, you can see this was the study. Estrone is a weak estrogen, only 4% of the estrogenic activity of estradiol. I'm not the first guy to dream this up. I already talked about that. However, we've known that it's bad. We know this. Association with estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, relationship between estrogen and estrogen metabolites, the postmenopausal breast cancer risk. This doesn't say here, but I'll tell you the abstract, the conclusion is estrone's bad, causes cancer. Estrone sulfate promotes human breast cancer cell replication. The effect of estrone on thrombin generation may explain the different thrombotic risk between oral and transdermal hormone replacement therapy. So I only use, in my practice, bioidentical hormones. That's it. If you come in and ask for something else, I say nope. And in 1,500 patients in 5 years, I have had 0 complications. Not a single DVT, pulmonary embolism, nothing. Not even one. And I use doses way higher than what the WPATH says is safe. Statistically, I should have had like 5, but I've had 0. And I think this is the reason, is that I only use bioidenticals and I pay attention to this. Estrone generates thrombin. So if we're giving people oral estradiol and they have this mutation and all of a sudden they have an astronomical amount of thrombin in their blood, what do you expect? All right, let's talk about blockers. So sometimes it's necessary to use blockers. The testosterone sometimes will just go down on its own when you give somebody estrogen or progesterone, but sometimes you really got to beat it. As a result, you use blockers. And the historical way of doing this is stuff like finasteride and spironolactone, which I despise, and I'm going to talk to you about why. But the crux of what I do is to use bioidentical hormones, and on very rare occasion, an androgen receptor inhibitor called bicalutamide to do this job. So I don't prescribe Spiro. If you come to me on Spiro, I will take you off of it. I will not write it. It is the standard of care according to every major medical group everywhere except for me. I'm going to let you know they're going to tell you to write Spiro. Why we think a potassium-sparing diuretic that causes, and this is known, depression, fatigue, visceral adiposity, like it increases serum cortisol levels, which is probably the reason why people get visceral adiposity. We know that it has issues with breast development. So this was a really cool study that took every single transgender woman from like Europe and this whole distribution, like thousands of people. And they looked at what they had used in terms of hormones up to that point. And when they stratified out for different examples and different things, they found that the Spiro group was significantly more likely to seek breast augmentation than every other group. There is a theory that spironolactone causes premature nipple plate fusion, meaning that basically the breasts are not able to achieve the full size they would have otherwise because you have cooked them with Spiro early on in development. So I have also seen this in some patients who took high-dose Spiro, who that almost no matter what I do, and we're talking, I even have one patient that I'm currently doing something I said I would never do. I'm putting topical estrogen on the breasts. And which is like, and the reason I'm doing it is that they have failed transdermal, injectable, oral. I've had their dose, their estradiol level at like 900, where they're living at near like what would be considered crazy dose, and still no breast development. So I said, okay, well, and they said, I'm gonna go get breast augmentation surgery. And I said, okay, I'd rather you not, because I always think of Kanye West's mom, who went in for routine breast augmentation and died. It's not without complications or surgical problems or capsular contracture or other issues. So let's try one more thing. I can screen for breast cancer, but I don't have a crystal ball to say whether my patient reacts to anesthesia and dies under the knife. So that's what we're doing right now. And with that patient, I've had modest growth so far, but I think that they may be a person who was fused prematurely with spironolactone. So I get testosterone levels on people with the intent of erectile function. If you don't want it, and most of my transgender women do not, they say, no, make it go away. I don't want to get morning erections. I don't want anything. Like, they hate it. They call it the dysphoria worm. I mean, there's the, what is the other one that I always say? Oh, God, I'm trying to remember now. The sadness noodle. I mean, there's just like, there's so many funny things that my patients have said to me before that I like try to store in my head. But regardless, if they don't want it to function, I keep it about 15, which is the adrenal levels that are produced when you shut somebody down using the Powers method, which we're going to talk about. If they want it higher than that, I keep them around 50. Anecdotally, African American trans women want erectile function. Whites don't. I don't know why that is. It's just a thing culturally that I have noted overwhelmingly to be true, and a fact of like 90-10. When it comes to white transgender women, they're usually like, meh. Like they're either apathetic or they don't want it. Very rarely are like, it needs to keep working. Whereas with my African American trans women, almost every single one of them would like to preserve their erectile function. It's like critically important. I don't know if it's a cultural difference or what, but it's something that I'm aware of and I cater to by helping them do this depending on what testosterone I keep them pegged at. All right. So there are other blockers that I don't use because they're terrible. 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. So there's a brand new drug out right now that is injectable, and it treats postpartum depression. So women that are like severely depressed, right? The problem with this drug is it has to be infused, and it has to be infused slowly over a 48-hour period. So you have to be in the hospital with the severe depression, and then they hook you up to it and they infuse it into you. And it's allopregnenolone, which is a neurocorticosteroid that is involved in depression. We find that it is heavily depleted in women with postpartum depression. Giving it to them makes them feel better. Do you know what else depletes neuroallopregnenolone? 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. It blocks the synthesis of it. I wonder why there's such severe depression associated with the usage of finasteride. But yet we hand it out like candy. Just like, oh, you have some hair problems? Here, have some finasteride. Oh, you got prostate cancer? Finasteride. Meanwhile, these people are severely depressed because we're literally depleting a neurocorticoid, which is super important to their general functioning. I don't write these, like almost never. And when I do, I write them topically, and that's it. I have a compounded finasteride or dutasteride with minoxidil at 10% that I put on the head, but I won't use them orally on people because there's just no reason to do it. The other reason it's stupid is that the overwhelming majority of transgender women have a very low testosterone to begin with. 5-alpha reductase inhibitors don't block testosterone at all. All they do is prevent the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, 3 times stronger testosterone. It's a more potent form. So if your total testosterone is 10, why do you have the patient on finasteride? You cannot imagine how often I have people come to me that have a testosterone of 0, 10, 15 that are on finasteride and this and that, and I'm like, what is your doctor doing? Because you just expose them to the side effects for no reason. So don't do that. Dutasteride can also be used topically, like I talked about. I have a compound that does that. Never prescribe any of these things to somebody who basically has a low T, because you're giving them side effects for no reason. So there was a drug called flutamide. There still is, actually, and it is an incredibly potent androgen receptor inhibitor. The best way to describe how it works, and I love this drug class, is here's a testosterone receptor. Spiro, all these other things block or reduce T levels, but flutamide, bicalutamide, and enzalutamide do this. They're like a bowl that sits over top of the receptor. They prevent the binding of the ligand. So it just sits here and inhibits the ability for testosterone to do anything. About 50 milligrams a day of bicalutamide is enough to inhibit about 400 nanograms per deciliter. So pretty solid amount of T you can just wipe out by using bicalutamide. Now, the reason I use bicalutamide instead of flutamide is that flutamide has a horrible reputation. It is like the angry, mean cousin of bicalutamide that causes liver failure. Bicalutamide causes hepatic irritation in about 1 in 500 people. I've seen it once, ever. It's very mild. We're talking like their AST and ALT went to like 60 compared to the other things they're on. I generally also use bicalutamide for another really cool reason. If I took it, say I had prostate cancer and I take it, no estrogen, no nothing, just bicalutamide, I'll grow breasts. It causes gynecomastia. The reason it does this is that when you inhibit the binding of testosterone, the body recognizes that it's not getting sex hormone signaling, and so it upregulates the expression of the estrogen receptor on the cell surface membrane, thereby sensitizing the cell to estrogen. Why are we giving people a testosterone poison that literally causes visceral adiposity and makes them feel like crap when this exists? It's because people are afraid. They're afraid of this drug, but I'm not, and I write it constantly. You can get it for like $16 a month at Kroger with a GoodRx coupon. I only use this drug temporarily right at the start of hormone therapy until I'm able to achieve what I call capture. Capture is the point when I own your endocrine system. It does what I tell it. It basically has stopped doing what it wants to do on its own, and it does what I tell it to do. And I'll explain to you how I do that in a little bit. I have to edit the slide. I've never seen a hepatic transaminase elevation once. 2 weeks ago, I actually saw it for the first time. Like I said, AST and ALT went to 60. All right, so in not the United States, there is cyperterone. Megase exists here. We have megestrol. But cyperterone acetate, CPA, is a blocker that's used in Europe constantly. It's what everybody uses in Europe. It causes prolactinomas and meningiomas. I don't use it because I can't, but even if I could, I still wouldn't. But you need to be aware of it, because if somebody comes in having taken it and they have, their peripheral field loss or whatever, you need to be aware that literally this thing can cause a brain tumor. I once saw a patient abusing cimetidine. Apparently cimetidine can cause gynecomastia, probably via its P450 inhibition. It screws with the cytochrome P450 system a lot, and so subsequently people try and take it to get gynecomastia, along with a thing called Pueraria mirifica, which is a plant that's like one of the most powerful phytoestrogens you can get that isn't outright estrogen without a prescription. I have a lot of people who are ex-DIY, meaning they used to do this on their own from the street, ordering it from all-day chemists in India and getting it shipped to them, and now they've come legit. They come to see me because I offer the opportunity to informed consent. All right, progesterone. Everybody thinks I'm nuts, that progesterone doesn't do anything. They are wrong. It does. It wouldn't exist in the human body if it had no purpose. If you don't give your transgender women progesterone, they get pointy boobs. I literally jokingly refer to it as trans-cone boob syndrome. They are pointy. They literally look like Madonna. They don't turn out right. It's a cone on a cone, and it looks literally like the secondary nipple, the areola is enlarged, sitting on top of a strange cone-shaped breast, because they never progress past 10 or 4. They are stuck in 10 or 4, and unless you give them this, they will not make it to 5. I have not seen patients make it other than this with progesterone. However, if you look up any other resource, well, not any other resource, but most other resources will say that I am wrong. However, I also do not write this, ever.
I don't like that characterization. I think that's unnecessary. That's going to make some people feel like garbage, and that's not true. Like there are cis women, for example, who have that kind of case in point, like Madonna.
Ever. The fact that Yaz and Yasmin...
Yeah, exactly. This is a weird... That was a weird thing to say. Like, I can imagine getting in trouble for that one.
...on the market with drospinerone in them blows my mind. Why? You guys know Yaz, right? I mean, it's a birth control that's like the most sued and litigious birth control to ever exist. Drospinerone is 8 times more deadly than every other progestin out there, yet we still prescribe it to people. Why? There's no need. I don't have to do this because I have this. This is bioidentical progesterone. Now, what I do that's a little different, and it is basically the crux of the method for me, is that I use rectal. And you have to think about the level of compliance I have for my patients, that I convince them to use a rectal suppository every single night of their life. And they do it. The reason I do it is because when you take this orally, about 95% of it is obliterated in the liver. It just never makes it. And their serum levels suck. But when you use it rectally, you wet it in your mouth or into the sink, and whoop, up it goes, and you go to bed. The cool part is progesterone, when absorbed in this way, is a GABA agonist, so it makes people sleepy. So they sleep super well on it. They say it's the best sleep they've had in their whole life. Then, the other benefit is that the distal third of the rectum, unlike the entire rest of the gastrointestinal tract, drains to the portal circulation. I'm sorry, not to the portal circulation, to systemic circulation. Everything else goes to portal, meaning goes to the liver first, but the distal third goes out to systemic. So when you put this in the distal third of the rectum, the capsule will basically start to melt, break down, and then release. And because it's an oil, it doesn't get all sucked up instantaneously. Over the next 24 hours, it is gradually absorbed. Then what's really neat about it, I think I have to go to a further slide to get to it, but I'm just going to tell you now.
Shit.
I discovered based on lab results I had in a patient, and I tried to find a comparative example, and there's a 1998 study on sheep where they inject them with progesterone and they measure their LH and FSH and it goes to 0. So I said, I bet if I can get progesterone levels high enough, I can do a thing like Lupron. Because progesterone is actually a GnRH agonist. Now, if you don't remember how the hypothalamic pituitary axis works, GnRH agonists stimulate the pituitary continuously. As in, like basically they press the button and hold it down. And once you do this, you get a release of LH and FSH, and then it stops. In order for it to work normally, you have to press in a pulsatile fashion. And that's how the pituitary regulates hormones. So if you give them progesterone in this way, which acts as a GnRH agonist and is a constant stimulus, LH and FSH fall to 0. When your pituitary is no longer secreting LH and FSH and they are 0, there is no signal to your testicles to make testosterone. They go off, just off. I never have a patient now that I have to give any other blockers to or do an orchiectomy on. In fact, what's really cool is their testosterone falls to usually about 10 to 20, which is the amount synthesized from the adrenal glands. I know that it is because their LH and FSH are undetectable, and their testicles are like totally atrophied away. So this is how it's working. That is the crux of how I do hormones differently, is this usage of rectal progesterone. I have also used topical progesterone on alternating breasts, and every now and again I have somebody, and even one cis woman I did it to, who had an asymmetrical breast, and I used it to enlarge the smaller breast and like even them out. And it actually worked, and they got gains, and they were very happy, and then we stopped the drug, and it kind of was like, and it went back, but not as bad as it was before it started. So the presence of the progesterone effectively evens them out, because topically the concentration they're getting is vastly higher than the systemic.
He wasn't talking about Madonna's actual breasts, he was talking about the cones that she wore in a couple of music videos. Yeah, but some people have like, they're all shapes, right?
Absorption. I'm sure the other breast is touching some of that progesterone, but when it's right on top of the right side, it evened out the other breast, which was kind of neat. Her period was a mess though, but she didn't care because it was that or surgery. She was like, I'm getting this fixed. So it was one of those things, kind of like my other patient talked about, where it's, a risk-benefit ratio, but rather than going under the knife, they opted to do that.
All right, so we're an hour in. It's almost 2 a.m. I'm going to call it here. We'll continue this soon, I think. I don't know if we'll do it tomorrow, but soon. So, without further ado, again, if you like what I do, I have a Patreon. We have a Discord. It's going to be closed for a little bit just because we're dealing with some nasty people. But then once we're done dealing with those nasty people, it will open up again. So mods, no invites right now. We'll open up later. We'll have a mod meeting soon to go over why. But yeah, so have a good night, everyone. Take care. Thanks for stopping by. Ciao.